It wasn't as long as we had thought it might go on. Police were definitely prepared as the Hells Angels and their associates.
Or Hutchinson Hells Angels biker gang member.
In the shadows of American counterculture, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club has cultivated a fearsome reputation since its founding in 1948. While officially describing themselves as a group of motorcycle enthusiasts, their history tells a different story, one written in violence, blood, and prison sentences. From murder and extortion to drug trafficking and racketeering, these outlaw bikers have repeatedly found themselves facing judges, juries, and the long arm of the law. Let's examine some of the notorious Hells Angels, whose crimes earned them extended stays in America's prison system. Number 20. Maurice Mom Boucher, the Quebec Massacre Mastermind.
Boucher led the Nomads, an elite chapter of the Hells Angels. He got the nickname Mom because he was apparently like an overbearing mother. For a time, he seemed untouched.
The story of Maurice Mom Boucher represents perhaps the most brutal chapter in Hells Angels history. Born in 1953 in Kausascal, Quebec, Boucher rose from poverty to become Canada's most feared criminal kingpin. His childhood, marked by an alcoholic father and extreme poverty, created the perfect breeding ground for a future criminal. By 9th grade, Boucher had dropped out of school, becoming heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol. His criminal journey began with petty theft to feed his addictions, but it wasn't long before he joined the SS, a white supremacist motorcycle gang. This affiliation made him an attractive candidate when he later sought membership with the Hells Angels in Quebec. Once accepted, Boucher's rise within the organization was meteoric and bloody. In 1985, Boucher orchestrated what became known as the Lennoxville Massacre, where 5 Hells Angels members were summoned to a quiet town in Quebec's eastern townships, only to be slaughtered in what Boucher saw as a necessary civil war to create a power vacuum he could fill. Not content with this bloodshed, Boucher formed the Nomads, an elite division within the Hells Angels, where new members had to commit murder as an initiation requirement, guaranteeing no undercover officers could infiltrate his inner circle. When rival gang The Rock Machine murdered a Hells Angels associate in 1994, Boucher launched a retaliatory war that lasted 7 years and claimed more than 160 lives. One innocent victim was 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers, killed by flying debris from a car bomb. But perhaps most chilling was Boucher's order to murder 2 prison guards, selected at random to intimidate potential witnesses against him. Initially, Boucher beat the murder charges for the prison guards in his first trial, displaying a smug demeanor throughout the proceedings. However, justice eventually caught up with him. Operation Springtime in 2001 led to his arrest along with 138 other Hells Angels members. This time, Boucher was convicted of numerous murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. Even from behind bars, his criminal activities continued as he orchestrated a plot to kill mob rival Reynald Desjardins, earning him an additional 10-year sentence in 2015. Throughout his trials, Boucher behaved like a celebrity, seeming to relish his infamy. But his story ended not with a bang, but a whimper. Expelled from the Hells Angels while in prison, he died of throat cancer in July 2022, alone and abandoned by those he once led. Like Joseph Lancier, the Rhode Island chapter president who would follow him years later, Boucher's courtroom demeanor revealed a man incapable of showing remorse for the lives he destroyed. Number 19. Joseph Lancier, the Rhode Island shooting.
New tonight, the leader of the Rhode Island Hells Angels is in trouble with the law. Yet again, 28-year-old Joseph Lancier is facing new charges after an altercation at the Cadillac Lounge in
the Hells Angels clubhouse in Providence, Rhode Island became the center of attention in June 2019, when Joseph Lancier, the 28-year-old chapter president, fired a shot at prospective member Richard Steinino's car outside the building. Their ongoing conflict had reached a boiling point, with Lancier determined to prevent Steinino from joining the club's ranks. The bullet struck the passenger side of the vehicle, narrowly missing its occupant, all while children were in the area and a school operated across the street. CCTV footage from the Hells Angels' own security system captured the incident, providing damning evidence against Lancier. Police arrested him just 3 hours after the shooting. The following day, state police deployed a Bearcat armored vehicle to ram into the clubhouse to serve a search warrant, explaining they needed such force because the building was known to be reinforced against conventional entry methods. Initially facing charges of discharging a firearm when committing a crime of violence and assault with intent to commit murder, Lancia could have been sentenced to up to 61 years in prison if convicted at trial. However, in a surprising turn of events, he reached a plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for pleading no contest to lesser charges of felony assault and carrying a gun without a license, the judge sentenced Lancia to 5 years in prison with 10 years of probation to follow. Additionally, he received a suspended 3-year sentence for a separate incident where he knocked out an off-duty bouncer at the Cadillac Lounge strip club while out on bail for the shooting case. A no-contact order was put in place, requiring Lancia to stay away from Steinino for 8 years. Despite the relative leniency of his sentence compared to what he potentially faced, Lancia's cold demeanor in court reflected the Hells Angels code: never show weakness, never admit wrongdoing. This same attitude would be mirrored in Adam Lee Hall's case, where defiance in the face of overwhelming evidence seemed to be the only acceptable response for a Hells Angel on trial. Number 18. Adam Lee Hall, the triple murder enforcer.
Hutchinson Hells Angels biker gang member Adam Lee Hall has been found guilty of killing 3 men from Pittsfield.
Adam Lee Hall's courtroom drama unfolded during one of Massachusetts' most notorious murder trials. As a sergeant-at-arms of the Berkshire County chapter of the Hells Angels, Hall orchestrated the abduction, torture, and murder of 3 men in August 2011 during Hurricane Irene. The primary target was David Glasser, a witness scheduled to testify against Hall in an upcoming case. Glasser's friends, Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell, were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, becoming collateral victims in Hall's determination to silence Glasser. The 4-week trial revealed Hall's shocking disregard for human life. According to testimony, Hall personally tortured the men before dismembering their bodies and burying them in a shallow grave. His ex-girlfriend testified that Hall had 3 guns stashed in a dog food bag the night of the murders, providing crucial evidence that helped secure his conviction. During the trial, Hall's defiance reached its peak during closing arguments. When the district attorney was explaining Hall's movements at the time of the victim's disappearance and killing, Hall erupted in the courtroom, cursing at the prosecutor and insisting he was 20 miles away from the victims. This outburst only cemented the image of Hall as a volatile, dangerous individual incapable of controlling his anger. After nearly 4 weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts, Hall was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with charges of extortion, kidnapping, and intimidation of witnesses. As Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder read out the sentence, 3 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each victim, plus additional time for the other crimes, Hall stood emotionless, his face betraying no remorse for his heinous actions. Like Stephen Sanders, the San Diego chapter president, whose case would demonstrate a similar lack of remorse, Hall's behavior in court revealed the dark psychology that often accompanies membership in these outlaw motorcycle clubs. Number 17. Stephen Sanders, the San Diego kidnapper.
I'm in here for multiple cases. I'm in here for armed robbery with a gang enhancement. I'm in here for assaults. I'm in here for
San Diego's Hells Angels. Chapter operated under the iron-fisted rule of President Stephen Sanders until his criminal empire came crashing down in 2012. Sanders faced a mountain of charges that painted a picture of a man who used violence as his primary tool of control. His criminal resume included assaults, kidnapping, robbery, and even solicitation of murder when he felt threatened by potential witnesses against him. The most serious charges stemmed from Sanders's ambush of a group of partygoers in Pacific Beach, an attack that demonstrated his willingness to target civilians without provocation. His violence wasn't limited to rival gangs. Sanders seemed to view anyone as a potential victim. In another incident, he kidnapped 2 people for the benefit of a street gang, furthering the Hells Angels' grip on the San Diego area. When Sanders realized the weight of evidence mounting against him, he resorted to desperate measures, attempting to arrange the murders of several potential witnesses to prevent them from testifying. This plot was discovered by investigators, adding solicitation of murder to his growing list of charges. Eventually, facing the prospect of an even harsher sentence if convicted at trial, Sanders pleaded guilty to multiple felonies, including robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, and solicitation of murder. Despite his guilty plea, Sanders displayed a stunning lack of remorse in court. During his sentencing hearing, he complained that he felt pressured to plead guilty and claimed he was being unfairly targeted by law enforcement. "I was definitely targeted by the law enforcement agency," he told the court. "These law enforcement officers are just flat out obsessed with trying to put the Hells Angels. The district attorney's office is biased against us." His attorney even attempted to withdraw Sanders' guilty plea, claiming new witness testimony had emerged. The court denied this motion, seeing it for what it was, a last-ditch effort to avoid consequences. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including audio recordings of Sanders planning his crimes, making his claims of innocence ring hollow. Sanders received a 25-year prison sentence, a substantial punishment that the district attorney's office described as a huge victory in getting a dangerous criminal off the streets. Throughout the proceedings, Sanders continued to defend the purity of the Hells Angels, refusing to acknowledge the organization's involvement in criminal activities despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Number 16. Jay Witt, the Nebraska Clubhouse Killer.
Prosecutors say 48-year-old Jay Witt will serve a mandatory 22.5 years in prison for killing William Furlong. Authorities say Witt was a member of the Hells Angels and Furlong was a prospective member. Both men were seen on video going into the Hells Angels clubhouse near 27th and J in July 2013, but only the convicted.
In July 2013, the Nebraska Hells Angels chapter became the scene of a deadly internal conflict when 48-year-old Jay Witt killed prospective member William Furlong inside the chapter's clubhouse. Security cameras captured both men entering the building, but only Witt emerged minutes later. When authorities later discovered Furlong's body, it was clear that a violent confrontation had taken place within the clubhouse walls. Witt initially evaded capture, stealing a Chevy Impala to flee the scene. Law enforcement tracked the vehicle using its OnStar navigation system, and members of the Metro Fugitive Task Force apprehended Witt near I-680 and 30th Street. When questioned about Furlong's death, Witt claimed he had acted in self-defense, though evidence suggested a premeditated attack. At the sentencing hearing, Furlong's widow delivered an emotional statement, urging the judge to look beyond stereotypes and see her husband as a human being whose death had devastated their family. She emphasized that despite his Hells Angels connection, William was first and foremost a husband, father, and friend whose life mattered to many people. The judge sentenced Witt to 30 to 40 years in prison, a substantial term that reflected the seriousness of the crime and Witt's extensive criminal history. Witt's case revealed the dangers that lurk within the Hells Angels organization itself, where conflicts between members can turn deadly in an instant. His cool demeanor during sentencing mirrored the detached attitude that many Hells Angels members display when faced with the consequences of their actions, a pattern that would continue with the Fresno murder case, where a targeted killing of a fellow angel would expose a wider criminal enterprise. Number 15. The Fresno murder silencing one of their own.
County. According to documents that were filed in court, 54-year-old Fresno Hells Angel Merle Hefferman was involved in the secret cremation of fellow member Joel Silva.
The 2014 murder of Hells Angels member Joel Silva exposed one of the darkest aspects of the motorcycle club, its willingness to kill its own members when they're perceived as threats. 3 high-ranking Hells Angels orchestrated Silva's execution: Fresno chapter president Brian Wayne Wendt, Santa Rosa chapter president Jonathan Nelson, and Russell Taylor Ott. Their collaborative effort to eliminate a fellow angel revealed the calculated violence that can exist within the organization's hierarchy. The plot began when the 3 men decided Joel Silva needed to be eliminated. Russell Ott lured Silva to Fresno under the false pretense that Silva needed to fight with Brian Wendt to resolve past issues between them. Believing he was heading to a confrontation that would clear the air, Silva arrived at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Fresno, unaware that he was walking into a death trap. As soon as Silva entered the building, Brian Wendt shot him in the head, executing him without warning or chance to defend himself. The aftermath of the murder revealed the conspirators' careful planning. The three men bribed their way into having Silva's body cremated at a funeral home, effectively destroying crucial evidence. However, their efforts to cover their tracks weren't entirely successful. When federal agents later investigated the Fresno clubhouse, they discovered bullet holes in the building's walls, physical evidence of the violence that had occurred inside. The murder investigation expanded into a broader FBI operation that uncovered a massive racketeering enterprise. The Sonoma County Hells Angels chapter, according to a 2017 indictment, had been involved in numerous serious crimes: racketeering, drug dealing, assault, obstruction of justice, and multiple murders. When the FBI raided the Fresno clubhouse, they seized multiple weapons, at least 10 motorcycles, drugs, and clothing items containing human DNA and blood. Ultimately, Wendt, Nelson, and Ott were all sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole for Silva's murder. Their case represented a significant victory for law enforcement in their ongoing battle against outlaw motorcycle gangs, demonstrating that even the most secretive organizations could be penetrated and brought to justice. Number 14. Kadir P., the Berlin charter leader. The streets of Berlin became the setting for one of Germany's most high-profile Hells Angels cases, when charter leader Kadir P. orchestrated the cold-blooded killing of Tahir O. in early 2014. The 26-year-old victim was attacked at a local bookmaker shop in what German authorities described as a kill contract put out by Kadir P. himself. After a lengthy trial that became the largest biker gang case in Germany's history, a Berlin court delivered its landmark verdict. Kadir P. was found guilty of incitement and sentenced to life imprisonment for his role as the mastermind behind the murder. Judge Thomas Gross didn't mince words when describing the charter leader, characterizing him as antisocial and aggressive, and emphasizing his central role in organizing the deadly assault. The court's ruling extended beyond just Kadir P. 7 other Hells Angels members also received life sentences for their participation in the attack, highlighting the organized nature of the crime. Surveillance footage revealed that some of the attackers had concealed their identities with masks during the assault, showing their premeditation and intent to avoid identification. One attacker received a reduced sentence of 12 years after cooperating with authorities, providing crucial testimony that helped prosecutors build their case against the Hells Angels leadership. This cooperation would have been seen as the ultimate betrayal within the organization, where loyalty to the club is supposed to supersede all other considerations, including personal freedom. Kadir P.A.'s case demonstrated the international reach of the Hells Angels and the similar patterns of violence that emerge regardless of national borders. Whether in Berlin, Quebec, or California, the organization's leaders have repeatedly shown a willingness to use extreme violence to maintain control and eliminate perceived threats. Like Norm Cox and Rob Thomas of the Kelowna chapter in Canada, Kadir P. discovered that Hells Angels membership offered no protection from the consequences of orchestrating brutal acts of violence. Number 13. Norm Cox and Rob Thomas, the Kelowna Killers. The peaceful community of Kelowna, British Columbia was shattered in June 2011 when 2 Hells Angels members committed a brutal public murder. Norm Cox and Rob Thomas, both associated with the Kelowna Hells Angels chapter, attacked and killed 51-year-old Dane Phillips in a shocking roadside assault that began as a dispute between teenagers and escalated to deadly violence. The tragedy unfolded when Phillips, a father described by loved ones as warm-hearted and gentle, attempted to resolve a conflict between his sons and 2 teenagers associated with the Hells Angels. His peacemaking effort was met with unfathomable violence when Cox and Thomas, armed with a baseball bat and a hammer, confronted Phillips on a public highway outside Kelowna. Court records revealed that Thomas approached Phillips and his children aggressively, wielding the weapons while shouting threats and proudly declaring his Hells Angels affiliation. What followed was a savage beating, with multiple blows to Phillips's head that left him fatally injured. The attack occurred in broad daylight on a public road, demonstrating the attacker's brazen disregard for witnesses or consequences. During their trial, prosecutors emphasized that the attack was motivated by Cox and Thomas's gang connections, portraying them as enforcers upholding the Hells Angels' fearsome reputation through extreme violence. The judge characterized the assault as brutal and unwarranted, noting that Phillips had posed no threat and was merely trying to peacefully resolve a situation when he was viciously attacked. Both Cox and Thomas were sentenced to 15 years in prison for the killing, though their sentences were later reduced to 12 years due to credit for pre-sentence custody. Throughout the proceedings, they displayed the characteristic detachment common among Hells Angels members facing criminal charges, showing little visible remorse for destroying a family and taking a life over what began as a trivial dispute between teenagers. Their brutal attack on a man simply trying to protect his sons demonstrated how the Hells Angels' influence extends beyond inter-gang rivalries to threaten ordinary citizens who cross their path. Similar to Zane Paora Wallace, the prospect whose case would reveal another side of Hells Angels' violence, Cox and Thomas showed how membership in the organization can transform personal disputes into deadly encounters. Number 12. Zane Paora Wallace, The Prospect's Rage. In a heart-wrenching case that revealed the dangers of Hells Angels culture infiltrating domestic relationships, Prospect member Zane Paora Wallace faced justice for the tragic death of Jasmine Wilson, a beloved mother whose life was cut short by Wallace's brutality. Unlike many Hells Angels cases involving rival gangs or internal club discipline, this case exposed how the violent tendencies cultivated within the motorcycle club can spill over into personal relationships with devastating consequences. The courtroom during Wallace's sentencing was charged with emotion as Wilson's family delivered impact statements describing their beloved Jazz and the irreplaceable void her death had created in their lives. Security personnel had to maintain order as tensions between the families ran high, with raw grief and anger permeating the proceedings. Crown Prosecutor Chris Wilkinson Smith emphasized Wallace's history of violence and the need for a substantial sentence to protect society from further harm. The court heard chilling details of how Wallace, as a Hells Angels prospect trying to prove his worth to the organization, had subjected Wilson to prolonged physical abuse, culminating in her death. What made the case particularly disturbing was evidence suggesting Wallace had been groomed by the Hells Angels culture to view violence as an acceptable means of asserting control and dominance, traits valued within the organization's hypermasculine environment. Wallace himself addressed the court, acknowledging the gravity of his actions and accepting the life sentence imposed by Justice Francis Cook, who established a minimum non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. The judge condemned the prolonged torment Wilson had endured, noting that the sentence reflected both the seriousness of the crime and the need to protect other potential victims from Wallace's violent tendencies. As the verdict was pronounced, emotions erupted in the courtroom, though security quickly diffused the situation before chaos could ensue. Detective Senior Sergeant Phil Taylor expressed relief for the Wilson family that the court process had concluded, hoping the verdict would provide some measure of closure for those grieving Jasmine's loss. Number 11. Brian Shane Henson, The Undercover Sting. Brian Shane Henson's fall from Hells Angels, enforcer to federal prisoner, began with a fateful negotiation in early 2017. The 42-year-old biker had no idea he was walking into a carefully orchestrated sting operation when he arranged to sell narcotics and firearms to what he believed was a fellow criminal. In reality, his buyer was an undercover ATF agent, gathering evidence for what would become a career-ending case against Henson. Alongside his co-defendant Hussein Eltarib, Henson drove to Needles, California to complete the exchange, confidently bringing illegal drugs and weapons to seal the deal. The moment they arrived, law enforcement officers moved in, arresting both men and seizing the contraband they had brought to the meeting. The sting operation had been flawlessly executed, catching Henson red-handed in the act of drug and weapon trafficking. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Henson made the difficult decision to plead guilty to distribution of controlled substances and trafficking in firearms. His plea carried severe consequences, a mandatory minimum sentence of 180 months, 15 years, in federal custody, effectively removing him from the Hells Angels organization and the criminal underworld he had operated in for years. The investigation that brought Henson down was a collaborative effort involving the ATF's Flagstaff office and various other law enforcement agencies determined to disrupt the Hells Angels' criminal activities. Their patient, methodical work paid off with the conviction of not just Henson, but also his accomplice Elterib, who received the same 15-year minimum sentence after being found guilty of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances and possession of a firearm in relation to drug trafficking. During his sentencing hearing, Henson maintained the stoic demeanor typical of Hells Angels members facing justice, but the reality of spending the next 15 years in federal prison clearly weighed on him. At 42, he would be approaching 60 by the time of his release, with his prime years spent behind bars rather than riding with his Hells Angels brothers. While Brian Shane Henson was caught red-handed by an undercover ATF agent in a sting operation that netted him 15 years for drug and weapons trafficking, his criminal exploits pale in comparison to the demonic appearance and sadistic violence of Caius Vaiovis, whose horrifying body modifications would be overshadowed only by the heinous nature of his crimes. Number 10. Caius Vaiovis, the Devil Incarnate.
Seething, Caius Vaiovis spat angry words at the jury after they found him guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation.
The Massachusetts courtroom fell silent as Caius Vaiovis entered, his appearance alone causing jurors to recoil in horror. With horn implants protruding from his forehead and 666 tattooed prominently across his face, Vaiovis had physically transformed himself into a walking nightmare. But it wasn't his demonic appearance that would condemn him. It was the unspeakable brutality of his crimes. Alongside Adam Lee Hall and David Chalou, Vaiovis stood accused of the 2011 abduction, torture, and murder of 3 men in Berkshire County: David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. The primary target was Glasser, who was scheduled to testify against Hall in an upcoming criminal case. Frampton and Chadwell simply had the misfortune of being with Glasser when the killers arrived, becoming collateral damage in Hall's determination to silence a witness. The prosecution methodically presented their case, describing how the victims were kidnapped during Hurricane Irene, brutally tortured, and then dismembered before being buried in a shallow grave. Medical examiners testified to the extensive trauma inflicted on the victims, details so gruesome that several jurors visibly struggled to maintain their composure. Throughout the trial, Vaiovis maintained an unsettling demeanor, occasionally smirking during particularly disturbing testimony. Unlike his co-defendants, who occasionally showed cracks in their hardened exteriors, Vaiovis remained defiantly proud of his actions, never displaying a hint of remorse. When the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts, including 3 charges of first-degree murder, Vaiovis's response shocked even the most seasoned courtroom observers. As the judge prepared to deliver his sentence, Vaiovis erupted in an outburst that would become infamous in Massachusetts legal history. Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder, unmoved by the theatrical display, sentenced Vaiovis to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, the mandatory minimum for first-degree murder in Massachusetts. As court officers led him away in chains, Vaiovis continued to stare down the jurors, his modified face contorted in rage rather than the fear one might expect from a man facing eternity behind bars. Vaiovis's case represented the extreme end of violence within Hells Angels circles, but his individual savagery would be matched by the sophisticated criminal empire of Frank Hannabuth, whose influence extended across European borders and whose operations moved far beyond simple violence into a complex network of organized crime. Number 9. Frank Hannabuth, the European Godfather. The Spanish courtroom buzzed with international media as Frank Hannabuth, the towering former European leader of the Hells Angels, faced justice in what prosecutors described as one of the most significant organized crime trials in Spanish history. Standing 6 feet 4 inches, with broad shoulders and intricate tattoos visible beneath his expensive tailored suit, Hannabuth cut an imposing figure even in custody. The German national had once ruled the Hells Angels empire across Europe with an iron fist before establishing what authorities called a criminal fiefdom on the Spanish islands of Majorca and Ibiza. Spanish prosecutors outlined Hannibeth's sophisticated operation, a criminal network that operated between 2009 and 2013, involving extortion, pimping, money laundering, illegal weapons possession, and violent robberies targeting wealthy tourists and business owners. Alongside Hannibeth stood dozens of alleged associates, many looking considerably less composed than their former leader as the charges were read aloud. Evidence presented included detailed ledgers of protection payments extracted from nightclub owners, photographs of luxury properties purchased with unexplained funds, and recordings of threatening phone calls made to business owners who resisted the Hells Angels' demands. Particularly damning was testimony about an elaborate prostitution ring allegedly operated by Hannibeth's organization, which prosecutors claimed had trafficked women from Eastern Europe to work in clubs controlled by the Hells Angels. Throughout the proceedings, Hannibeth maintained an almost regal composure, occasionally whispering to his legal team, but otherwise showing minimal reaction to the evidence presented against him. The charges against Hannibeth carried potential sentences totaling 13 years in prison and fines exceeding $4.5 million for criminal organization membership, money laundering, and illegal weapons possession. As the trial progressed, German authorities watched with particular interest, having previously struggled to successfully prosecute Hannibeth in his home country despite years of investigation. Hannibeth's methodical approach to criminal enterprise stood in stark contrast to the explosive rage that characterized Rodney Lee Rollness, whose violent response to perceived disrespect of Hells Angels symbols would lead to a brutal murder and eventually a life sentence. Number 8. Rodney Lee Rollness, the Deadly Enforcer. I was framed. The shout echoed through the U.S. District Court as Rodney Lee Rollness made his final desperate stand against justice. With his muscular frame, tattoo-covered arms, and the distinctive Hells Angels death head prominently displayed, Rollness embodied the intimidating image the motorcycle club had cultivated over decades. But now, facing life imprisonment for murder, his imposing presence was diminished by the shackles binding his wrists and ankles. You allowed paid informants to lie on your stand. This whole thing is a setup. Rollness continued, his face reddening with every word as Judge Robert Lasnik remained composed, assuring the defendant that he could appeal if he disagreed with the court's findings. The crime that had landed Rollness in this position was particularly brutal. In 2001, at a party in rural Snohomish County, Washington, Rollness had murdered Michael Santa Walsh for falsely claiming membership in the Hells Angels. For Rollness, such a claim wasn't merely dishonest, it was an unforgivable desecration of what he considered sacred symbols. Walsh's crime of falsely wearing Hells Angels colors had signed his death warrant in Rollness's eyes. For the murder of Walsh, Rollness and an accomplice had been awarded a filthy few patch, a macabre honor within certain Hells Angels circles, signifying that the wearer had killed for the club. This patch, which Rollness had worn proudly on his vest, became damning evidence in the prosecution's case, demonstrating both his motive for the murder and the organization's approval of his actions. As Judge Lasnik pronounced the life sentence, Rollness's defiance finally crumbled. His shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, the tough exterior gave way to the realization that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The conviction represented a significant victory in the government's efforts to combat outlaw motorcycle gangs, with law enforcement officials describing it as a step toward dismantling what they considered a dangerous criminal organization. While Rollness had killed to enforce the Hells Angels code, Jonathan Nelson would orchestrate an even more calculated murder, the execution of a fellow member who had violated the club's internal rules, proving that sometimes the greatest danger to a Hells Angel comes from within the organization itself. Number 7. Jonathan Nelson, the Santa Rosa executioner. The courtroom fell silent as Jonathan Nelson, the former president of the Santa Rosa chapter of the Hells Angels, stood impassively while the prosecutor described how he had orchestrated the execution of one of his own members. With his graying beard and weathered face, Nelson looked more like a tired businessman than a motorcycle club president capable of ordering a cold-blooded killing. But appearances, as the jury would learn, were deeply deceiving. Nelson had once wielded tremendous power within the Hells Angels hierarchy in Northern California. As president of the influential Santa Rosa chapter, his orders were followed without question, and his authority extended far beyond club business into various criminal enterprises that generated substantial profits for the organization. It was this power that Nelson wielded in 2014 when he decided that fellow Hells Angel Joel Silva needed to die. According to court testimony, Nelson had grown increasingly concerned about Silva's behavior, believing he had become a liability to the club through his reckless actions and loose talk. Rather than simply expelling Silva from the organization, Nelson concluded that a more permanent solution was necessary, one that would also serve as a warning to other members about the consequences of violating club rules. Working with Fresno chapter president Brian Wayne Wendt and fellow member Russell Taylor Ott, Nelson devised a plan to lure Silva to the Fresno clubhouse under false pretenses. The prosecution described how Nelson convinced Silva that he needed to travel to Fresno to resolve some issues with Wendt, assuring him that it would clear the air and strengthen his standing in the club. What Silva didn't know was that his death had already been decided. Nelson had arranged every detail of the execution, from ensuring Silva would arrive alone to planning the disposal of his body afterward. Phone records showed multiple calls between Nelson and the other conspirators in the days leading up to the murder, with location data placing Nelson in strategic planning meetings. Perhaps most damning was testimony from a former Hells Angels member who had decided to cooperate with authorities after becoming disillusioned with the organization's increasing violence. Throughout the 9-week trial, Nelson maintained the stoic demeanor expected of Hells Angels members, showing no emotion even as the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his guilt. As United States District Judge Edward J. Davila sentenced Nelson to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Nelson's sophisticated criminal operations in California stood in stark contrast to the smaller scale but equally illegal drug trafficking that landed Canadian Hells Angel Emery Pitt Martin behind bars, though both cases revealed the organization's deep involvement in criminal enterprises on both sides of the border. Number 6. Emery Pitt Martin, the veteran smuggler. In the quiet courtroom of Bathurst Provincial Court, 61-year-old Emery Pitt Martin appeared via video link, allegedly due to COVID-19 symptoms. A fitting final chapter for a man whose criminal career had been defined by keeping others at arm's length while he orchestrated major drug smuggling operations across Canadian provinces. The longtime Hells Angels member sat expressionless as Judge Denis LeBlanc delivered his sentence, 7.5 years in prison for drug trafficking and participation in a criminal organization. Martin's criminal history stretched back decades, establishing him as one of Canada's most persistent drug traffickers. RCMP investigators described him as a veteran Hells Angels member who had been affiliated with the organization since 1997 and specialized in smuggling narcotics from Quebec into New Brunswick. His arrest in 2018 was the culmination of a lengthy investigation that uncovered evidence of Martin's responsibility for importing a staggering 96 kilograms of drugs during just the summers of 2016 and 2017 alone. What made Martin particularly valuable to the Hells Angels was his extensive network of connections throughout Quebec and New Brunswick, allowing him to move large quantities of drugs while minimizing the risk of detection. He had perfected routes across provincial borders that avoided law enforcement checkpoints and developed relationships with corrupt officials who would look the other way in exchange for payments. The court heard how Martin had risen through the ranks of the Hells Angels to become a key figure in their Canadian operations precisely because of his reliability and discretion. Unlike some of his more flamboyant counterparts, Martin had maintained a relatively low profile, focusing on the business side of the organization rather than the violence and intimidation that often attracted police attention. Judge LeBlanc acknowledged Martin's time already served in pre-trial detention, 1,292 days since his 2018 arrest, and noted the harsh conditions of his confinement, which included extended periods in solitary and constant camera surveillance in his cell. These factors resulted in a reduction of his original sentence, though the judge emphasized that the severity of Martin's crimes demanded significant prison time. The prosecution countered by highlighting the extensive damage caused by Martin's drug trafficking operations, describing him as a key figure in a criminal network that had brought addiction and violence to communities across New Brunswick. Evidence presented included financial records, surveillance photographs, and testimony from other individuals arrested in connection with the operation who had agreed to cooperate with authorities. As Martin's video feed was disconnected following the sentencing, the court proceedings concluded without drama or outbursts. A surprisingly quiet end for a man whose criminal activities had spanned more than 3 decades. His methodical approach to drug trafficking in Canada would be mirrored on an even larger scale by David Giles, whose attempt to smuggle 1/2 ton of cocaine into British Columbia would earn him the longest sentence ever given to a Canadian biker gang member. Number 5. David Giles, the record-setting smuggler. The atmosphere in the British Columbia Supreme Court was tense as 66-year-old David Giles, a veteran Hells Angel with decades of membership in the notorious motorcycle club, awaited the judge's decision. His weathered face, lined with years of hard living, betrayed little emotion as Justice Carol Ross prepared to deliver what would become a landmark sentence in Canadian legal history. Giles stood convicted of conspiracy to import and traffic 500 kilograms of cocaine, 1/2 ton of the drug with a street value estimated at $15 million. The case against him had been built through an elaborate undercover operation in which police officers posed as international drug dealers, carefully gaining Giles's trust over months of meetings and negotiations. The sting operation culminated in 2012 when Giles and his associate Kevin Van Kalkeren arranged for what they believed would be a massive cocaine shipment to be delivered to a Burnaby warehouse. The exchange began with Giles' organization making a $14 million down payment to the undercover officers. When the supposed drugs arrived at the warehouse, police moved in, arresting Giles and several associates in a carefully coordinated takedown operation. Surveillance footage played during the trial showed Giles personally inspecting packages he believed contained cocaine, his experienced hands checking the quality of what would have been one of the largest drug shipments in British Columbia history. In recorded conversations, Giles could be heard discussing distribution networks and profit margins with the undercover officers, revealing the business-like approach the Hells Angels took to their drug trafficking operations. The judge then announced her decision: 18 years in prison for Giles, the longest sentence ever handed down to a British Columbia biker gang member. After accounting for time served in pre-trial custody, Giles would remain incarcerated for 11 years and 1 month, likely to be a life sentence given his age and deteriorating health. Giles' defense had argued for leniency based on his medical condition. He suffered from advanced liver disease and required a transplant, with his lawyer emphasizing that a lengthy prison term could amount to a death sentence given his health concerns. Medical records submitted to the court indicated that without proper treatment, Giles had a limited life expectancy. As Giles was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his stoic expression finally faltered, the reality of potentially spending his final years behind bars sinking in. His case sent a powerful message to organized crime groups in British Columbia. Even the highest-ranking members of outlaw motorcycle gangs were not beyond the reach of the law. While Giles faced his record sentence for attempted cocaine importation, another Hells Angel was facing the consequences for his role in a murder plot that had claimed the life of a fellow member, as Russell Taylor Ott discovered that loyalty to the club would not protect him from justice. Number 4. Russell Taylor Ott, the faithful executioner. The United States District Court in San Francisco fell silent as Russell Taylor Ott entered, his weathered face and graying hair making him look more like a tired tradesman than a member of the country's most notorious motorcycle club. At 69 years old, Ott was facing the culmination of a legal process that would determine whether he would spend his remaining years as a free man or die behind bars for his role in the murder of fellow Hells Angel Joel Silver. Unlike his co-defendants, Brian Wayne Went and Jonathan Nelson, who held leadership positions within the Hells Angels, Ott was what prosecutors described as a soldier, a loyal member who followed orders without question and whose dedication to the club superseded all other considerations, including the law. It was this unwavering loyalty that prosecutors argued had made Ott a willing participant in Silva's execution, despite having no personal grievance against the victim. According to the evidence presented during the 9-week trial, Ott had played a crucial role in luring Silva to his death. Phone records and witness testimony revealed that Ott had contacted Silva, convincing him to travel to the Fresno Hells Angels clubhouse by claiming that Silva needed to meet with Fresno chapter president Brian Wendt to resolve some lingering issues. Silva trusted Ott, believing him to be a friend and ally within the club, never suspecting that he was being delivered to his executioner. Throughout the trial, Ott maintained the stoic demeanor expected of Hells Angels members, showing no emotion even as the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his involvement in the murder conspiracy. His attorney attempted to portray him as a minor participant who had been pressured by higher-ranking members into assisting with the plan, but phone records and witness testimony painted a picture of willing involvement rather than reluctant compliance. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, Ott declined, maintaining the Hells Angels code of silence even as he faced spending the rest of his life in prison. This silence, prosecutors argued, further demonstrated his continued loyalty to an organization that had involved him in murder. Judge Edward J. Davila sentenced Ott to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, emphasizing that while he may not have pulled the trigger, his role in the murder conspiracy was essential to its success. As court officers led Ott away in handcuffs, the elderly Hells Angel finally showed a flicker of emotion, a momentary widening of the eyes as the reality of dying in prison settled upon him. His case served as a stark warning about the consequences of unwavering loyalty to a criminal organization, a lesson that James Henry McCauley Jr. would also learn as he faced justice for decades of drug trafficking under the Hells Angels banner. Number 3. James Henry McCauley, Jr., the aging kingpin. At 67 years old, James Henry McCauley Jr. had spent more of his life as a criminal than as a law-abiding citizen. The former high-ranking member of the Rochester Hells Angels chapter stood before Judge Charles J. Siragusa in federal court, his once imposing frame now diminished by age and years of hard living. The courtroom was packed with law enforcement officials who had spent years building the case against a man they considered one of the most persistent drug traffickers in western New York. McCauley's criminal enterprise had operated with remarkable longevity, distributing narcotics throughout Rochester and the surrounding areas from 2002 to 2010. Using his connections and status within the Hells Angels organization, he had established a reliable supply chain from California, moving large quantities of drugs east and distributing them through a network of associates linked to the motorcycle club. What made McCauley's case particularly remarkable was his persistence. Even after being arrested on federal racketeering charges in 2007, he had continued to direct drug trafficking operations from behind bars, using coded messages and intermediaries to maintain control of his criminal network. This defiance of authority demonstrated both his commitment to criminal enterprise and his belief that he was untouchable. FBI wiretaps played during the trial captured McCauley discussing drug shipments in thinly veiled code, referring to cocaine as white paint and heroin as brown sugar. In one recording, he could be heard instructing an associate on how to test the purity of a cocaine shipment, revealing both his expertise in the drug trade and his hands-on approach to managing the operation despite his advanced age. The evidence against McCauley was overwhelming. Federal investigators had compiled financial records, surveillance photographs, wiretapped conversations, and testimony from former associates who had chosen to cooperate rather than face lengthy prison terms themselves. The case represented the culmination of a joint investigation involving the FBI, DEA, ATF, and local law enforcement agencies that had methodically dismantled McCauley's operation. With that, the judge sentenced McCauley to 300 months, 25 years, in federal prison. At his age, the sentence was tantamount to life imprisonment, a fact that seemed to register on McCauley's face as the reality of the punishment sank in. For the first time during the proceedings, his composed facade cracked slightly, a momentary widening of the eyes, the only indication of his distress. As Macaulay was led from the courtroom in chains, the prosecution team exchanged quiet congratulations. The conviction represented the culmination of years of investigation and the removal of a significant figure in organized crime from the streets of Rochester. While Macaulay faced decades behind bars for drug trafficking, another Hells Angel would find his freedom similarly curtailed after a routine traffic stop led to the discovery of illegal firearms, as Christian A. Rufino's case demonstrated the cascading consequences that can follow from a single mistake. Number 2. Christian A. Rufino. Downfall at a traffic stop. The unassuming streets of Cranston, Rhode Island, became the unlikely setting for the downfall of Christian A. Rufino, a 42-year-old former member of the New Rock chapter of the Hells Angels. What began as a routine traffic stop in December 2009 quickly escalated into a case that would send Rufino to federal prison for 15 years, providing a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change for those living on the wrong side of the law. Rufino's journey to prison began when a vigilant Cranston police officer pulled over his vehicle for a minor traffic violation. Something about Rufino's demeanor raised the officer's suspicions, leading to a request to search the vehicle. This seemingly routine encounter took a dramatic turn when the search revealed a loaded .38 caliber handgun under the driver's seat, additional ammunition in the trunk, and a small bag containing narcotics. The prosecution painted a different picture, arguing that Rufino's Hells Angels connections and extensive criminal history suggested the weapon was more likely related to ongoing criminal activities than simple self-defense. Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard W. Rose methodically outlined Rufino's prior convictions, emphasizing the pattern of violence and disregard for the law that had characterized his adult life. Judge William E. Smith, after considering the arguments from both sides, sentenced Rufino to 180 months, 15 years, in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release, the mandatory minimum for an armed career criminal under federal sentencing guidelines. The judge acknowledged the severity of the sentence, but emphasized that it reflected both Rufino's current offense and his extensive criminal history. As Rufino was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his face remained impassive, though the weight of his sentence, 15 years for a traffic stop gone wrong, was evident in his slumped shoulders. His case served as a stark reminder of the severe consequences that can follow even seemingly minor encounters with law enforcement for those with extensive criminal backgrounds and gang affiliations. While Rufino's downfall came from an unexpected traffic stop across the country, a Hells Angels chapter president was facing life imprisonment for a far more calculated crime: the cold-blooded execution of a fellow member who had violated club rules, as Brian Wayne Wendt would discover when the full weight of federal racketeering laws came crashing down on him. Number 1. Brian Wayne Wendt, the Fresno executioner. The federal courtroom in San Francisco hummed with tension as Brian Wayne Wendt, the imposing president of the Fresno chapter of the Hells Angels, awaited the jury's verdict. At 44, Wendt embodied the Hells Angels aesthetic, heavily tattooed, bearded, with hard eyes that had seen decades of violence. As chapter president, he had once wielded near-absolute power over his territory, but now he sat powerless as 12 jurors decided his fate. The centerpiece of the government's case against Wendt was the 2014 murder of fellow Hells Angel Joel Silver, a killing that prosecutors described as a cold-blooded execution carried out to maintain discipline within the organization. According to evidence presented during the trial, Silver had run afoul of club rules and was deemed a liability by the Hells Angels leadership, prompting the decision to eliminate him. FBI surveillance operations and wiretapped phone calls had captured Wendt discussing Silver in the days leading up to the murder, using coded language that investigators had decoded through months of careful analysis. The prosecution's case was strengthened by forensic evidence recovered during a raid on the Fresno Hells Angels clubhouse. Despite efforts to clean the scene, luminol testing revealed blood traces that DNA analysis later confirmed belonged to Silver. Bullet holes in the wall matched the caliber of a weapon registered to Wendt, further tying him directly to the killing. Throughout the trial, Wendt maintained the stoic demeanor expected of Hell's Angels members, showing no emotion even as former associates testified against him and damning evidence mounted. His attorney attempted to create reasonable doubt by suggesting that the government's case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of cooperating witnesses who had their own motivations for implicating Wendt. Despite these arguments, the jury found the evidence compelling, returning after 3 days of deliberation with a guilty verdict on charges of murder in aid of racketeering, a federal charge that carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment. As the verdict was read, Wendt remained expressionless, his only reaction a slight tightening of his jaw. United States District Judge Edward J. Davila sentenced Wendt to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
Trial of a member of the Hells Angel Motorcycle Club. DA was explaining.
Hells Angels Motorcycle Club has not been found by a jury in the state of Nevada to be a criminal gang.
Some of the most feared criminals in history weren't mafia bosses or cartel leaders, they were Hells Angels. From cold-blooded unalivings to massive drug empires, these men built their reputations through sheer violence and ruthless control. Even law enforcement struggled to keep up, as they left a trail of destruction in their wake. These are the 10 most dangerous Hells Angels ever, the ones who turned biker wars into bloodbaths and made entire cities fear their name. Let's get into it. Number 10. Sonny Barger. Sonny Barger was the force that shaped the Hells Angels into what they became, a feared, ruthless, and highly organized outlaw motorcycle club with a reputation that stretched far beyond the roads they rode. His influence went beyond simply leading a gang. He built an empire of crime, violence, and intimidation that law enforcement struggled to control for decades. His dangerous reputation became the stuff of legends, a long list of violent confrontations, criminal enterprises, and strategic moves that kept him at the top of the outlaw biker world. Born in 1938 in Modesto, California, Barger grew up in a tough environment, and that hardened survivalist mindset stuck with him for life. He didn't want to be known as a reckless outlaw. He was calculated, always thinking ahead, knowing when to act and when to strike fear into those who stood in his way. When he founded the Oakland chapter in 1957, the Hells Angels were already known, but under Barger's leadership, they became infamous. He turned the club into more than just a group of wild bikers. It became a structured, organized syndicate that extended its reach across the country. Drugs, extortion, weapons trafficking, these became the main hustles for the Hells Angels under Barger. By the 1960s, the Oakland chapter had positioned itself at the top of the illegal drug trade, operating one of the most dangerous narcotics networks in the country. He became the leader giving orders and was reportedly involved in major deals himself, ensuring that control over the operation remained tight and that everyone knew he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. This hands-on leadership style meant that his authority was rarely questioned. Everyone in the club knew that stepping out of line could have brutal consequences. Violence was a constant shadow trailing Barger and the Hells Angels, and he wielded it like a weapon when necessary. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, the club was engaged in vicious wars with rival gangs such as the Gypsy Jokers. They had random brawls and would erupt in vicious bar fights. They were deadly, calculated battles for territory and dominance, leaving a trail of blood in their wake. Under Barger's command, the Hells Angels became known not just as bikers, but as a force to be feared, a group that settled disputes with fists, knives, and bullets. The 1969 Altamont Speedway concert was supposed to be a triumphant West Coast Woodstock, but it spiraled into chaos. The Rolling Stones hired the Hells Angels as security, paying them in beer to control the massive crowd of 300,000. As tensions escalated throughout the day, violent clashes broke out between the Angels and concertgoers. By the time the Stones took the stage, the atmosphere was already on the brink of disaster. Near the front of the crowd, 18-year-old Meredith Hunter tried to push closer to the stage, but was shoved back by the Hells Angels. In response, he pulled out a .22 caliber revolver, a move that sealed his fate. Within seconds, multiple Angels attacked, and Alan Passaro hurt Hunter repeatedly, unaliving him as panicked concertgoers backed away. His girlfriend's screams for help were lost in the chaos. The Rolling Stones played on, unaware of the fatal violence unfolding just feet away. The merciless act, caught on film in Gimme Shelter, became one of the darkest moments in rock history. The footage showed Hunter raising his gun, the Hells Angels reacting, and the brutal attack that followed. The media portrayed the club as ruthless enforcers who ruled the concert with violence rather than security. Sonny Barger later defended the club, insisting they had acted in self-defense and blaming the Rolling Stones for putting them in charge in the first place. The fallout was immediate. Altamont, meant to be a celebration of 1960s counterculture, instead marked its violent demise. The Hells Angels' reputation was permanently tainted, no longer just an outlaw club, but a gang known for unchecked brutality. Law enforcement knew Barger wasn't just another outlaw. They saw him as the mastermind behind the Hells Angels' criminal operations. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, authorities came after him hard. He was arrested multiple times, with charges ranging from drug possession to conspiracy to commit unaliving. In 1973, he was convicted of heroin possession and illegal firearm possession, earning himself a 4-year prison sentence. That was just the beginning. In 1988, he was convicted of conspiracy to transport and receive explosives with intent to harm and damage buildings. Despite spending years behind bars, his influence never faded. Even locked up, Barger still controlled the Hells Angels, proving that his power extended far beyond the streets. But what made him truly dangerous wasn't just his criminal activities. It was his ability to survive and adapt. In 1982, he was diagnosed with throat cancer and lost his vocal cords. But that didn't slow him down. He kept riding, kept leading, and kept enforcing his rules, proving that even a life-threatening illness couldn't take away his power. He remained a key figure in the outlaw biker world for decades, and even after stepping back from leadership, his reputation alone was enough to command respect. Barger took a chaotic group of outlaws and turned them into an empire of crime, fear, and dominance. Whether it was drugs, violence, or war with rival gangs, he was always at the center, making the decisions that shaped the club's legacy. He was the embodiment of what made the Hells Angels feared: ruthless, strategic, and completely unafraid to challenge the law at every turn. Barger's reign left a mark that still lingers over the outlaw world, but he wasn't the only Hells Angel who built a legacy of violence and control. Another name helped shape the club's rise in Canada and played a key role in some of its most ruthless power moves. Number 9. Michel Langlois. Michel Sky. Langlois stands as a prominent and formidable figure in the annals of Canadian organized crime, particularly within the notorious Hells Angels motorcycle club. His journey from humble beginnings to becoming a central figure in one of the world's most infamous outlaw biker organizations is a testament to his complex character and the violent subculture he inhabited. Born on July 2, 1946, in Saint-André-Avelin, Quebec, Langlois' early life was marked by a transition from rural simplicity to urban complexity. As a teenager, he worked on a farm in his hometown before relocating to Montreal. It was in this bustling city that Langlois' life took a decisive turn toward the outlaw biker scene. His passion for aviation, evidenced by his possession of a pilot's license and ownership of an aircraft, earned him the moniker Sky, a nickname that would follow him throughout his criminal career. In 1964, Langlois co-founded the Popeye Moto Club, alongside Roger Calvé and a handful of other enthusiasts. The club experienced rapid growth, expanding to 7 chapters across Quebec by 1970. The Popeyes quickly garnered a reputation for their violent tendencies, often engaging in gratuitous and sadistic acts that set them apart from other biker gangs. This notoriety caught the attention of the Hells Angels, who were looking to expand their influence into Canada. The early 1970s saw the Popeyes forging alliances with established criminal entities, notably the Dubois brothers. Initially serving as enforcers, the Popeyes soon delved into drug trafficking under the Dubois' guidance. Their aggressive entry into the narcotics trade led to violent confrontations with rival gangs, most notably the Devil's Disciples and the Montreal chapter of Satan's Choice. The ensuing biker war was brutal, with the Popeyes emerging victorious, solidifying their dominance in Montreal's criminal underworld. The pivotal moment in Langlois' criminal career came on December 5, 1977, when the Popeyes were patched over by the Hells Angels, establishing the first Canadian chapter of the International Motorcycle Club. This merger marked a significant expansion of the Hells Angels into Canada, with Langlois playing a crucial role in this transition. His leadership qualities did not go unnoticed, and he quickly ascended the ranks within the organization. The early 1980s were tumultuous for the Hells Angels in Quebec. The assassination of Yves Le Boss Buteau, the national president, on September 8, 1983, created a power vacuum that Langlois would eventually fill. As the new national president, Langlois faced the daunting task of consolidating the club's power amidst internal strife and external threats. One of the most notorious events during Langlois' tenure was the Lennoxville Massacre in 1985. The Montreal North chapter, based in Laval, had become increasingly unruly, engaging in excessive drug use and attracting unwanted attention from law enforcement. In a drastic move to restore order and discipline, 5 members of the Laval chapter were ambushed and unalived at the Sherbrooke chapter clubhouse on March 24, 1985. While Langlois played a passive role in orchestrating this purge, he was actively involved in the aftermath, assisting in disposing of the victims' bodies in the St. Lawrence River. This brutal act underscored the lengths to which the Hells Angels would go to maintain internal cohesion and control. The fallout from the massacre led to Langlois' arrest on July 2, 1985. Released pending trial, he chose to flee Canada, becoming a fugitive. After spending 2 years in Morocco, Langlois voluntarily surrendered to authorities on April 13, 1988. He pleaded guilty to being an accessory to unaliving and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, marking his second federal incarceration. Upon his release, Langlois continued to wield significant influence within the Hells Angels. In March 1997, he, along with 7 other members and 2 prospects, established the South Shore chapter in Saint-Basile-le-Grand. This strategic move allowed the chapter to evade certain legal classifications as a criminal organization, given that none of its members had recent criminal convictions. The late 1990s saw Langlois embroiled in significant criminal activities. On January 18, 1998, his associate, Robert Savard, was arrested with 178 kilograms of cocaine concealed in a trailer. This incident implicated Langlois in a major drug trafficking operation, leading to his arrest on October 14, 1998. He subsequently pleaded guilty to multiple drug-related charges and was sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $20,000 on July 9, 1999. The period between 1994 and 2002, known as the Quebec Biker War, was marked by violent clashes between the Hells Angels and rival gangs like the Rock Machine. This conflict resulted in over 160 deaths, including innocent bystanders. Langlois' involvement in this war highlighted his unwavering commitment to expanding the Hells Angels' dominance in Quebec's drug trade and organized crime scene. Law enforcement's efforts to dismantle the Hells Angels' operations culminated in Operation Charq-QC in 2009. Langlois was among the 156 individuals indicted, facing charges related to conspiracy to commit unaliving and drug trafficking. On March 16, 2015, he pleaded guilty to these charges and was sentenced to 9 months in prison, in addition to time already served. Despite his incarcerations, Langlois remained a significant figure within the Hells Angels. In April 2018, he was arrested again as part of Project Objection, an investigation revealing that senior Hells Angels members controlled extensive drug networks across Quebec. Langlois pleaded guilty to charges of drug trafficking, conspiracy and gangsterism on October 3, 2018, resulting in a 58-month prison sentence. Langlois' repeated brushes with the law did little to deter his involvement in organized crime. Even while incarcerated, he continued to associate with known criminals, leading to the denial of his parole requests in September 2020 and February 2021. However, after serving 2/3 of his sentence, he was granted parole in July 2021, albeit under strict conditions, including prohibitions against wearing Hells Angels insignia and associating with individuals involved in criminal activities. This investigator breaks down ongoing investigations tied to Michel Langlois and Salvatore Cazzetta, revealing that Langlois is still actively contesting legal charges. Langlois' life is emblematic of the violent and clandestine world of outlaw motorcycle clubs. His ascent from a co-founder of a local biker gang to the national president of the Hells Angels in Canada illustrates his strategic acumen and ruthless determination. His involvement in internal purges, large-scale drug trafficking, and violent turf wars underscores the perilous nature of his tenure. Langlois' actions have left an indelible mark on Canada's criminal landscape, solidifying his legacy as one of the most dangerous figures in the history of the Hells Angels. But the next name on this list was a ruthless enforcer whose influence spread across the country, leaving a legacy of crime that still haunts law enforcement today. Number 8. David Carroll. David Carroll, one of the most feared leaders of the Hells Angels, was born and raised in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. His journey into the violent world of biker gangs started with the 13th Tribe Motorcycle Club, a gang he led in the early 1970s. At that time, the 13th Tribe dominated the biker scene in Nova Scotia, known for their open hostility toward law enforcement. Carroll's ambition and cunning helped the club gain the attention of the notorious Hells Angels, specifically the Quebec-based Popeye Moto Club. Carroll's gang proved their loyalty in the fall of 1984 when they served as bodyguards for prominent Hells Angel Walter Stadnick while he recovered in a hospital from a serious accident. This gesture sealed the relationship between the two gangs, leading to the 13th Tribe being absorbed into the Hells Angels. On December 5, 1984, the 13th Tribe officially became the first Hells Angels chapter in Atlantic Canada, with Carroll as president. This move consolidated control over the lucrative drug trade on Canada's east coast. Carroll's association with violence escalated rapidly. He became involved in the infamous Lennoxville Massacre of 1985, where several Hells Angels from the Laval chapter were brutally unalived. Although Carroll was charged with first-degree unaliving for his role in the massacre, he was acquitted in 1987. Afterward, he returned to Halifax, where his criminal activities expanded beyond drug trafficking. He ran a prostitution ring, demanding 40% of earnings from local workers. When one woman refused, Carroll became violent towards her. His ability to avoid lengthy jail time showcased how deeply embedded he was in the criminal underworld. When he was convicted for living off the avails of prostitution in 1986, Carroll served only a year in prison, despite his known involvement in much larger crimes. It became clear that Carroll wasn't just a gang leader. He was a mastermind behind numerous drug and violent operations that extended across Canada. Carroll's power extended far beyond Halifax. By the 1990s, he moved to Quebec, controlling a drug pipeline between Halifax and Montreal. He was known for wearing the Hells Angels' Filthy Few patch, a mark given to members who had committed harmful acts for the gang. His association with violent acts didn't stop at the Lennoxville Massacre. He was reportedly involved in multiple unalivings, including the unaliving of rival gang members and those who crossed him. His influence and wealth grew as he expanded his criminal operations, but he remained deeply violent. Carroll's involvement in the Quebec Biker War was particularly brutal, as he took out numerous contracts on the lives of rival Rock Machine members. His hatred for the Rock Machine was personal, and Carroll showed no signs of letting up during the bloody conflict that claimed dozens of lives. In 2000, Carroll's control started to weaken when law enforcement launched Operation Springtime, targeting the Hells Angels criminal empire. A warrant was issued for his arrest on charges of multiple unalivings, but Carroll managed to flee to Mexico, escaping the Canadian authorities. Over the years, he was rumored to have been seen in various countries, including Brazil and Australia, but Carroll's whereabouts remain unknown. David Carroll's legacy in the Hells Angels is one marked by extreme violence, criminal cunning, and a brutal grip on power that stretched across Canada. Despite his disappearance, his influence in the world of outlaw biker gangs continues to echo, making him one of the most dangerous figures in the gang's long and bloody history. But within the Hells Angels, the deadliest threats often came from within. The next name on this list helped orchestrate a brutal purge that sent a clear message: loyalty had its limits. Number 7. Michael Genest. Moondram. Michael Genest, also known as Michael Jinx Genest, was a notorious member of the Hells Angels, deeply involved in the infamous Lennoxville Massacre, a bloody event that showcased just how dangerous he and his fellow gang members were. This massacre in 1985 became a pivotal moment in the history of the Hells Angels in Canada, cementing Genest's reputation as a violent enforcer and key figure in the deadly internal power struggles that often plagued the gang. The Lennoxville Massacre was not just a random act of violence, but a calculated purge of the Laval chapter of the Hells Angels. The Laval members had become too wild and reckless, drawing unwanted police attention due to their drug-fueled partying and poor management of gang affairs. Genest and others from the Montreal and Sherbrooke chapters decided that these members, seen as liabilities, had to be eliminated. In March of that year, 5 Laval members, including Guy Louis Adam and Jean-Pierre Mathieu, were lured to a clubhouse in Lennoxville under the guise of a meeting, but were ambushed. The victims were unalived and dumped in a river. This was seen as a way to restore order and discipline within the Hells Angels as they moved to a more businesslike approach in the criminal underworld. Genest's role in this massacre was significant. As part of the execution squad, he ensured that the gang's leadership transition was carried out violently and effectively. However, his brutality didn't stop there. Just 2 weeks later, Genest was involved in another crime, this time eliminating Claude Coco Roy, a Hells Angels prospect who was closely tied to the Laval members. Roy's unaliving further solidified Genest's standing as a key enforcer within the gang. What distinguished Michel Genest even more from ordinary criminals, as well as contract criminals, was not only his willingness to unalive, but also the fact that he participated in the overall criminal schemes of the Hells Angels. In addition to harming people, he was directly handling the drug business, which was an important source of income for the gang. In the late 1990s, the Hells Angels changed their leaders and were charged with importing and conspiring to import cocaine, which marked the transformation of the Hells Angels from local thugs to international drug dealers. But Genest was a violent and dangerous man, and his capture and subsequent arrest occurred because of his confession. He has been in jail for 4 years, receiving a full life sentence for his crimes, and in 2010 he got full parole. This case was not only over an expulsion for infractions over the policy against drug use, but also because the Hells Angels believed Roy was an informant for the police. Genest was ready to harm without hesitation, showing no mercy during his crimes. His actions reflected the rising violence and growing paranoia within the Hells Angels during that time. Contrary to what many predicted, the Lennoxville Massacre and the events that followed only strengthened the Hells Angels' control over Quebec's criminal scene. Genest's willingness to commit such brutal acts made it clear that the gang would go to any lengths to assert their dominance, eliminate enemies, and expand their influence. Genest's story brings the reader back to the fact of how desperate the Hells Angels were to protect their business venture and criminal network, and his role in the Lennoxville Massacre makes him one of the most ruthless of the Hells Angels wrestlers. His participation in multiple unalivings, combined with his role in the drug trade, makes it clear that Michel Genest was a formidable and feared figure within the gang's ranks. But long before Genest carried out the club's violent orders, there was another man responsible for creating the code they lived by. Number 6. Otto Friedli. Another main character in the history of the Hells Angels was Otto Friedli, the man who became one of the building blocks of the outlaw biker community. Although not so recognized as Sonny Barger, Friedli was instrumental in the early formation of Hells Angels. Friedli was born in Wisconsin in 1931, and pride and an inability to sit still seemed to be with him from the beginning. He then moved to Los Angeles and then to Santa Barbara, where he enlisted in the army and trained as a mechanic. However, because of his criminal activities, he was discharged, and this made him change his lifestyle. Friedli ventured into outlaw bikers through the POB, or Pissed Off Bastards of Bloomington, which was a brutal motorcycle club. This is a clear implication that his involvement in the infamous Hollister riot in 1947, which captured the perception of the public that bikers were a group of lawless people, was a defining moment in his early biker career. Although this was a relatively small town that was encroached upon by thousands of bikers, the riot led to violence and mayhem and became the iconic image of the outlaw motorcycle gangs as people saw them. The fact that Friedli was already associated with such a violent club at an early age, along with his involvement in the Hollister riot, only proves how deeply entrenched Friedli was in the culture of violence and anarchy that would define the Hells Angels later on. The riot itself became iconic of the general biking trend of rebelling against society and living an outlawed life on the road. Another example of the dangerous environment Friedli was in was his transfer from Pissed Off Bastards of Bloomington to Hells Angels. He played an active role in formulating the early organizational framework and social outlook of the Hells Angels, partly responsible for the violent and non-conformist image the club currently possesses. While he may not have gotten the same level of publicity as Sonny Barger, Friedli is part of the Hells Angels story. Crucial to Friedli's conception of the outlaw biker stereotype is the riot, wherein bikers filmed on location in Hollister, California, rampaged through the town on their motorcycles. Soon after, he left and began to prospect for the Hells Angels, a decision he would later not regret. Friedli is widely known as one of the founders of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, but he refuted the claim, saying he was asked to join the organization by a friend. Nevertheless, it is impossible to leave the question of the club's structure and its association with violence without mentioning his role. By the early 1960s, Friedli had risen to the rank of president of the San Bernardino chapter, also known as Burdu, which quickly became one of the strongest and most notorious chapters of the Hells Angels. Contrary to what Friedli depicted the Hells Angels as a harmless group of bike enthusiasts, they were far from that. They were a criminal gang that was engaged in drug business, violence, and theft. Friedli himself was implicated in the robbery of Miramar Hotel in the 1950s, which proved the extent to which the club and Friedli himself would go to source for funds. During his reign as the leader of the San Bernardino chapter, he became infamous for doing whatever it would take to make the gang bigger. Friedli's criminal record didn't stop with just robbery. In the late 1960s, he was arrested again, this time during a raid on a Rancho Cucamonga ranch, where the Hells Angels had been stockpiling firearms. Friedli, already carrying a prior conviction, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for firearm possession. During his time behind bars, he reportedly found religion, devoting hours each day to reading the Bible, a stark contrast to his violent past. But this next Hells Angels member had no such redemption. His violent streak and relentless attacks on law enforcement made him one of the most feared members in the club's history. Number 5. James Brandes, James Ezekiel. Jim Brandes was one of the most feared and dangerous members of the Hells Angels Oakland chapter, known for his violent tendencies, involvement in organized crime, and disregard for law enforcement. As the vice president of the Oakland chapter, he played a central role in the gang's activities during the 1970s, a time when the Hells Angels were heavily involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and racketeering. Brandes gained notoriety early on for his involvement in drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises. In 1977, he was caught with a pound of methamphetamine, along with various contraband items that underscored his role in organized crime. Among the seized items were a police radio, a homemade police siren, a military handbook on booby traps, and even a device for detecting surveillance equipment. These tools highlighted his preparedness to evade law enforcement and his intent to continue criminal operations undetected. His possession of Zerbe's personal information, such as the detective's address, phone number, and license plate, further showcased his audacity and the lengths to which he was willing to go to intimidate those pursuing him. Brandes's willingness to confront law enforcement became even clearer when he was implicated in the attempted unaliving of San Jose Police Sergeant John Cracked in 1977. Cracked, a key figure in investigating the Hells Angels, narrowly escaped with his life when a bomb exploded near his vehicle. Brandes was later charged with attempted unaliving as part of a broader racketeering case against the club in 1979. This incident marked a turning point in Brandes's criminal career, cementing his reputation as someone who would stop at nothing to protect the interests of the Hells Angels and retaliate against those who stood in his way. Brandes was openly defiant toward law enforcement. His disdain for authority figures, particularly those who actively pursued the Hells Angels, was a defining aspect of his personality. In 1978, Brandes gave a now infamous interview with Rolling Stone magazine, where he stated that he didn't take orders from anyone in the streets and certainly wasn't going to take orders from the likes of Detective William O. Zerby, who had been investigating him. His comments reflected the deeply ingrained Hells Angels philosophy of rejecting societal norms and the law, coupled with a personal vendetta against specific law enforcement officers. Brandes and Kenneth Owen, a member of the Vallejo Hells Angels, were later charged with the attempted unaliving of Zerby after Zerby was severely injured in a car bombing in 1978. Zerby had been on his way to court for a pre-hearing related to Brandes' drug possession charges when the bomb detonated, leaving him with significant injuries. Although Brandes and Owen were eventually acquitted of the charges related to the bombing, this event added to Brandes' dangerous reputation, painting him as a man unafraid to resort to extreme violence. Aside from his violent confrontations with law enforcement, Brandes was also implicated in several unalivings, further solidifying his image as a ruthless enforcer. He was linked to the passing of Ray Dale Stork, a fellow Hells Angel who had been scheduled to testify against the gang in a trial. Stork's body was discovered in a ravine near Port Costa, California, in 1974, and his death was widely believed to have been orchestrated to prevent him from testifying. Brandes was also connected to the unalivings of Alvin Lloyd Prata and his wife, Mary Ellen, who were found dead by the side of a road near Sunol in August 1974. Despite these serious allegations, Brandes managed to avoid conviction, in part due to the Hells Angels' network of protection and intimidation tactics that made witnesses and informants reluctant to cooperate with authorities. As Brandes' criminal activities deepened, he seemed driven by both fear and a sense of invincibility due to his past experiences. His involvement in major crimes made him a prime target for police investigations, which intensified over the years. By the 1980s, Brandes' criminal career began to unravel. His continued participation in violent crimes and racketeering led to several high-profile trials, with many ending in mistrials thanks to his legal team. In the final years of his life, Brandes struggled with mental and emotional issues, likely caused by the stress of his criminal lifestyle and legal battles. After being sentenced to long-term imprisonment for multiple felonies, including attempted unaliving and drug trafficking, he took his own life in 1994. His passing marked the end of a violent and rebellious quest for power within one of the world's most infamous motorcycle gangs. Brandes left a lasting impression on the Hells Angels and the outlaw biker community. His violent tendencies and involvement in unaliving conspiracies made him a key enforcer for the Oakland chapter, and his actions impacted many people in the communities where the gang operated. Even in death, Brandes remains a symbol of the extreme lawlessness and immorality associated with the Hells Angels. While Brandes met a tragic end, George Wethen chose a different path, one that would shake the very foundations of the Hells Angels from the inside. Number 4. George Wethen. George Wethen was once one of the most dangerous and influential members of the Hells Angels, serving as vice president of the Oakland chapter during its formative years under the notorious Sonny Barger. Wethen's involvement in the club spanned some of its most violent and criminal activities, including drug trafficking and brutal unalivings. His story stands as a stark reminder of the dangerous lifestyle that defined the Hells Angels, particularly in the 1960s and 1970s when they dominated the West Coast's outlaw scene. Wethen's rise to prominence in the Hells Angels was largely due to his close relationship with Barger, the club's iconic leader. However, his participation in the criminal underworld was far from limited to his vice presidential title. He was deeply involved in the club's narcotics operations, positioning himself as one of the West Coast's leading drug dealers. Wethen was known for his ability to navigate the complex and dangerous world of drug distribution, which made him a valuable asset to the Angels as they expanded their criminal empire. The pivotal moment that highlighted how dangerous Wethen was came when authorities discovered 3 bodies on a property linked to him near Ukiah, California. The bodies were of Hells Angels members who had attempted a coup within the club, a dangerous move that led to their deaths. The victims were poisoned with spiked coffee, and while Wethen wasn't directly involved in their unalivings, he had inadvertently left the keys to the property in the hands of William Mitten, another Hells Angels associate. This discovery led to a significant police raid on Wethans Ranch, where drugs, weapons, and more bodies were suspected to be buried. Wethans' involvement in these events exemplified the internal violence that plagued the Hells Angels, as members who were perceived as threats to the club's leadership or integrity were eliminated in cold blood. The authorities' raid on Wethans Ranch was a turning point for him. Realizing the gravity of the situation and the weight of the charges against him, Wethan made the rare and dangerous decision to turn state's witness. In exchange for his testimony against other Hells Angels members, Wethan was granted immunity. This decision to cooperate with law enforcement was risky, as it meant betraying one of the most feared biker gangs in the world. Wethan's testimony led to the arrest and prosecution of several prominent Hells Angels members. It also marked the end of his association with the gang and led him to enter the Witness Protection Program along with his family. Even after Wethan left the Hells Angels, his life remained fraught with danger. While imprisoned, he attempted to take his own life by inserting pencils into his eyes, a desperate act that underscored the psychological toll of his involvement in the gang's brutal world. After his release and entry into witness protection, Wethan faded into obscurity, his whereabouts unknown to this day. Wethan's memoir provides a chilling account of his time in the club and the extreme levels of violence and criminality that surrounded him. The book details the wild, drug-fueled parties, million-dollar drug deals, and the deadly consequences for those who crossed the Hells Angels. Wethan's decision to leave and testify against his former brothers is one of the most significant betrayals in the club's history, and it serves as a testament to the dangerous life he led. In the end, Wethan's dangerous lifestyle caught up with him, and while he managed to survive by turning the state's evidence, his legacy within the gang is one of betrayal and violence. He was forced into a lifetime of hiding, but Chico Mora would go on to prove how some stayed loyal till the end. Number 3. Robert Chico Mora. Robert Chico Mora's influence within the outlaw motorcycle club scene, particularly in Arizona, is a testament to his formidable presence and strategic acumen. His journey from leading the Dirty Dozen Motorcycle Club to integrating it into the Hells Angels showcases his pivotal role in shaping the biker landscape of the region. In the 1960s, the Dirty Dozen Motorcycle Club emerged as a dominant force in Arizona's biker community. By the 1970s, Mora had ascended to a leadership position within the club, particularly overseeing the Tucson chapter. Under his guidance, the Dirty Dozen solidified its reputation, engaging in activities that ranged from drug trafficking to violent confrontations, thereby asserting their dominance over rival groups. Mora's leadership was characterized by a blend of charisma and intimidation. Standing at 6 feet 3 inches and weighing nearly 300 pounds, his physical stature was imposing. His time in prison, resulting from a manslaughter conviction in 1980, saw him refine his boxing skills, culminating in a Golden Gloves championship. This combination of physical prowess and combat training made him a figure to be reckoned with, both within his club and among adversaries. The early 1990s marked a period of territorial assertion for the Dirty Dozen under Mora's command. He and his comrades actively patrolled Tucson's streets and establishments, confronting rival motorcycle clubs that displayed the Arizona rocker on their vests. Mora's ultimatum was clear: remove the insignia or face violent repercussions. This aggressive stance ensured the Dirty Dozen's uncontested dominance in the region. Mora's strategic vision extended beyond immediate territorial control. Recognizing the benefits of aligning with a larger organization, he championed the merger of the Dirty Dozen with the Hells Angels. This ambition came to fruition in 1997, providing the Hells Angels with a significant foothold in Arizona and expanding their influence. Mora's role in this transition underscored his strategic mindset and his ability to navigate complex organizational dynamics. Despite his criminal endeavors, Mora maintained a complex personal life. He was known to engage in community activities, and his interactions with acquaintances displayed a different facet of his personality. However, his violent tendencies were never far from the surface, as evidenced by his treatment of those who opposed or disrespected him. Mora's legacy within the Hells Angels is complicated. To some, he is revered as a legendary figure who played a crucial role in expanding the club's territory and influence. His death on January 1, 2014, due to complications from diabetes, was marked by a significant turnout of Hells Angels members, who honored him with a 20-mile funeral procession. While Mora helped expand the club's reach, the next member on this list took things to a much deadlier level and used his expertise in explosives to become one of the most feared members in the Hells Angels' history. Number 2. Yves Apache Trudeau. Yves Trudeau, also known by his monikers Apache and the Mad Bomber, was a prominent figure in Canada's outlaw biker scene, particularly within the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Born on February 4, 1946 in Quebec, Canada, Trudeau's early life was marked by a challenging upbringing. He endured mistreatment from his father, whose strict military-style discipline left a lasting impact on him. This tumultuous environment may have contributed to Trudeau's later involvement in criminal activities. In his teenage years, Trudeau found employment with Canadian Industries Limited, where he received training in handling explosives. This expertise would later become a defining aspect of his criminal career, earning him the nickname the Mad Bomber. His proficiency with explosives set him apart in the criminal underworld, making him a valuable asset to those seeking lethal solutions to their problems. Trudeau's foray into the biker world began in the late 1960s when he became a founding member of the Popeye Moto Club, based in Montreal. The Popeyes quickly gained notoriety for their violent confrontations and dominance in Quebec's biker scene. Their reputation for brutality and willingness to engage in criminal enterprises made them a formidable force. In 1977, the Popeyes were absorbed into the Hells Angels, forming the club's first Canadian chapter, known as the North Chapter, based in Laval, Quebec. This merger marked a significant expansion of the Hells Angels' influence in Canada. Within the Hells Angels, Trudeau distinguished himself as a lethal enforcer. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches and weighing 135 pounds, he did not fit the stereotypical image of a biker, but his small stature belied his deadly capabilities. Trudeau's criminal activities spanned over a decade, during which he admitted to committing 43 crimes between September 1973 and July 1985. His methods were varied and ruthless. 29 victims were shot and 10 were harmed using explosives. This crime spree made him one of Canada's most notorious assassins. One of Trudeau's early victims was Charlie Hatchez, a fellow Hells Angel who had developed a severe drug problem and owed a substantial debt to Frank Dooney Ryan, a prominent figure in Montreal's criminal underworld. Hatchez's unreliability and debt posed a threat to the club's operations, leading to a decision to eliminate him. Trudeau carried out the execution, demonstrating his commitment to the club's code and his willingness to enforce discipline through lethal means. Trudeau's expertise with explosives made him a valuable asset in the Hells Angels' conflicts with rival gangs. He played a significant role in the First Biker War, a violent feud between the Hells Angels and the Outlaws Motorcycle Club that erupted in the late 1970s. On March 29, 1979, Trudeau planted a bomb in the vehicle of Roland Dutemple, an Outlaws associate, resulting in Dutemple's death. This act was part of a broader strategy to assert the Hells Angels' dominance in Montreal's criminal landscape. In September 1979, Trudeau and other members established the Laval chapter of the Hells Angels. This group became infamous for its violent and reckless behavior, as well as excessive drug use. The northern part of the St. Lawrence River became known as the Hells Angels Graveyard, due to the number of bodies disposed of there, a testament to the chapter's ruthless enforcement tactics. The Laval chapter's notoriety eventually led to internal strife within the Hells Angels organization. The internal tensions culminated in the Lennoxville Massacre of March 24, 1985, where 5 members of the Laval chapter were executed by their fellow Hells Angels. This purge was aimed at eliminating members deemed too reckless and a liability to the organization's criminal enterprises. Trudeau narrowly escaped this fate, as he was undergoing treatment in a rehabilitation facility at the time. His absence during the massacre likely saved his life, but also marked the beginning of his disillusionment with the club. Facing the threat of assassination from his own organization and struggling with a cocaine addiction, Trudeau made the unprecedented decision to become a government informant. His testimony was pivotal in the prosecution of numerous Hells Angels members and associates. In exchange for his cooperation, Trudeau received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 7 years. This lenient sentence, given the magnitude of his crimes, was controversial but underscored the value of his insider information to law enforcement efforts against organized crime. Trudeau was granted parole in 1994 and entered the Witness Protection Program under the alias Denis Coté. He attempted to lead a quiet life, working various jobs, including as a nursing aide. However, his past continued to haunt him. In 2004, Trudeau was arrested and subsequently convicted for mistreating a 13-year-old boy, leading to a 4-year prison sentence. This conviction further tarnished his already notorious reputation. In 2007, while serving his sentence, Trudeau was diagnosed with cancer. His health deteriorated rapidly, leading to his transfer to a medical facility. He died in July 2008 at the age of 62. Trudeau's life, marked by extreme violence and criminality, serves as a stark example of the perils associated with organized crime. His transformation from a feared assassin to a government informant highlights the complex dynamics within criminal organizations and the lengths to which individuals might go to survive. Yves Trudeau's legacy is one of infamy. His actions contributed to a period of intense violence in Canada's history, particularly within the biker subculture. His willingness to cooperate with authorities provided a rare glimpse into the inner workings of the Hells Angels, leading to significant law enforcement successes against organized crime in Canada. But Paul Eichscheid took deception to another level, living a double life that hid crimes so brutal they stunned even the underworld. Number 1. Paul Eichscheid. Paul Merle Eichscheid, born in 1970, led a double life that starkly contrasted his daytime profession with his nocturnal affiliations. By day, he was a stockbroker employed by Charles Schwab, a reputable financial services firm. By night, he immersed himself in the outlaw world of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, becoming a full-patch member of the Mesa, Arizona chapter. This dual existence exemplified a complex individual capable of navigating both corporate and criminal realms. The Hells Angels, established in 1948, have long been associated with various criminal enterprises, including drug trafficking, extortion, and violent crimes. Eichscheid's involvement with the club implicated him in activities that extended beyond the law, reflecting the organization's notorious reputation. Eichscheid's notoriety escalated following the passing of Cynthia Yvonne Garcia in October 2001. Garcia, a 44-year-old mother of 6, attended a party at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Mesa, Arizona. During the gathering, she reportedly made comments perceived as disrespectful towards the club and its members. In response, Eichscheid, along with fellow members Kevin J. Augustiniak and Michael Christopher Mesa Mike Kramer, attacked Garcia. They beat her unconscious, placed her in the trunk of a car, and transported her to a remote desert location near the Salt River. There, they physically harmed her, and her body was discovered on October 31, 2001. Prior to this incident, Eichscheid had been indicted on charges related to drug trafficking and racketeering, including kidnapping and homicide. Despite the severity of these charges, his professional background and minimal criminal record led to his release on his own recognizance under electronic monitoring. However, in 2003, Eichscheid removed his monitoring device and fled Arizona, prompting the U.S. Marshals Service to add him to their 15 most wanted list in 2007. Eichscheid's ability to evade capture for several years underscored his resourcefulness and the extensive network provided by his association with the Hells Angels. His flight from justice highlighted the challenges law enforcement faces when dealing with individuals deeply entrenched in organized crime networks. The case of Cynthia Garcia's passing also shed light on the internal dynamics of the Hells Angels and the lengths to which members would go to enforce their code of conduct. The involvement of multiple members in such a heinous act demonstrated the club's capacity for orchestrated violence to maintain their reputation and authority. Eichscheid's eventual capture in Argentina in 2011 marked the end of a nearly decade-long international manhunt. His arrest was the result of coordinated efforts between the U.S. Marshals Service, the Diplomatic Security Service, and Interpol. This collaboration highlighted the global reach of law enforcement agencies in pursuing fugitives involved in organized crime. Upon his extradition to the United States in 2018, Ayshaid faced the charges that had been pending against him for years. His case served as a testament to the persistent efforts of law enforcement to bring individuals involved in violent criminal activities to justice, regardless of the time elapsed or the distances crossed. Ayshaid's story is emblematic of the complex interplay between seemingly respectable societal roles and the underworld of organized crime. His ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while engaging in heinous acts with the Hells Angels underscores the multifaceted nature of criminal enterprises and the individuals within them. The Hells Angels' involvement in various criminal activities, including drug trafficking and violent crimes, has been well documented over the years. Ayshaid's actions contributed to this legacy, reinforcing the club's reputation as a formidable and dangerous organization. Ayshaid's transformation from a stockbroker to a fugitive tied to brutal crimes was something law enforcement never saw coming. His descent into organized crime left a lasting mark, proving how deeply such affiliations can consume a life. The Hells Angels, notorious for their outlaw ways, have seen some of their most dangerous members locked away in 2025. From orchestrating cold-blooded murders to leading global drug empires, these bikers didn't just ride, they ruled with fear. But now the law has caught up with them, slamming the iron bars shut. Who are these infamous figures, and what crimes led them to a life behind bars? Let's dive into the shocking tales of violence. Number 5. The Notorious Trio. 3 members of the notorious Hells Angels Motorcycle Club are now spending the rest of their lives behind bars, sentenced for murder in aid of racketeering. Federal prosecutors identified Jonathan John Nelson, Brian Wayne Went, and Russell Taylor, Rusty Ott, all from the Sonoma County chapter, as guilty of carrying out a series of brutal crimes. Their most shocking act was the murder of fellow member Joel Silva. Nelson, who was president of the Sonoma chapter at the time, planned the attack. He had Ott lure Silva to Fresno, where Went, the Fresno chapter president, shot him in the back of the head. To cover their tracks, they cremated Silva's body. The trio, along with other Hells Angels, also threatened witnesses and their families, ensuring no one dared to speak out. 5 additional members pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges, earning prison sentences of up to 7 years. But for Nelson, Went, and Ott, life sentences mean they'll never ride free again. This case once again shows the dark and violent reality of the Hells Angels, a club where loyalty to their code often comes with devastating consequences. This is precisely why the next dangerous Hells Angels went behind bars once again. Number 4. Joseph Lancia. The former leader of the Rhode Island Hells Angels, Joseph Lancia, is back in prison after violating his parole conditions by attending the wake of Edward Eddie Lato, a reputed underboss of the Patriarca crime family. Lancia, aged 33, was arrested by the Rhode Island State Police Violent Fugitive Task Force and returned to the adult correctional institution. Lancia had been serving a 5-year sentence since 2022 for shooting at a rival outside the Hells Angels Providence clubhouse and assaulting a bouncer at the Cadillac Lounge strip club. Released early in June 2024, Lancia was prohibited from associating with Hells Angels members, convicted felons, or holding any leadership role in the club. Despite these restrictions, Lancia was seen at Lato's wake, surrounded by convicted felons, fellow Hells Angels, and Red Devils Motorcycle Club members, a Hells Angels affiliate. Law enforcement analyst Stephen O'Donnell explained that Lancia's presence wasn't surprising, given Lato's long-standing ties with the nefarious club. For decades, the club and the Patriarca crime family worked together on underworld operations like extortion of strip clubs. There's a huge chance that Lancia was mandated to join the wake, as per the Hells Angels rule. If he hadn't shown up to pay respect to Lato, he might have been in deep trouble with his allegedly former club. But now he is about to spend a long time in jail. His original sentence stemmed from a June 2019 incident where he fired a gun at Richard Starnino, a former prospect of the biker gang. The dispute escalated as Starnino drove past the Hells Angels Providence clubhouse on Messer Street, with surveillance footage from the club's own cameras showing Lancia firing at the truck. This shooting initiated a dramatic raid by the Rhode Island State Police. While out on bail for that case, Lancia was involved in another violent incident, punching a bouncer at the Cadillac Lounge strip club, leaving the man unconscious after he hit his head on the ground. Lancia is trying very hard to battle the parole violation, but it seems like he will be rotting in jail until the next year, at least. Up next, California police uprooted the entire chapter of the Hells Angels Club. Number 3. The California chapter. By June 2024, the Bakersfield chapter of the infamous Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had been dismantled in a sweeping crackdown by California authorities, much to the club's dismay. The Kern County Sheriff's Department revealed that 6 members of the chapter, including its president and vice president, were arrested on a litany of violent charges. These included kidnapping, first-degree robbery, false imprisonment, assault with a firearm, criminal conspiracy, and elder abuse. Authorities raided multiple locations, seizing around 25 firearms, ammunition, high-capacity magazines, and gang-related paraphernalia. Images shared by the sheriff's office showcased a stash of weapons, leather vests bearing Hells Angels MC California, and memorabilia from other chapters across the nation, a dark reminder of the club's notorious reach. The arrested members were named Ricardo Alvarez, Armando Villaseñor, Joseph Soto Sr., Joseph Soto Jr., Joshua Zavala, and John Seeger, all from Bakersfield. Additionally, Joshua Vaughn, who was already in custody, was tied to the operation. 8 search warrants were executed across Bakersfield in connection with the arrests. Investigators labeled Alvarez, Villaseñor, Soto Sr., Soto Jr., and Zavala as patched members of the Bakersfield Hells Angels, while Vaughn and Seeger were identified as members of the Sons of Hell Motorcycle Club, a group subordinate to the Hells Angels, taking their orders from the infamous gang. The suspects were booked into Kern County Jail, leaving the once dominant Bakersfield chapter in ruins. The investigation, however, was far from over. Similarly, a gang associated with Hells Angels in Canada is also rotting in prison. Number 2. High-profile arrests in Canada. In July 2024, Ontario Provincial Police arrested 4 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and 1 member of the Red Devils Motorcycle Club in connection with a violent robbery at a Hamilton bar. The incident, which occurred on July 4, 2024, involved a victim being assaulted and robbed of personal items during the attack. The investigation was taken up by the OPP's Biker Enforcement Unit, working closely with the Hamilton Police Service. Their coordinated efforts led to a series of searches at residences and the clubhouses of both the Hells Angels and the Red Devils in Hamilton. The Red Devils, often recognized as a support club for the Hells Angels, were found to be directly tied to the crime. During the raids, officers seized a cache of weapons and equipment, including 4 shotguns, 3 rifles, a shotgun barrel, ammunition, body armor, and a possession and acquisition license. It was obvious that the group was ready to initiate violence anywhere at any time. The men arrested were a 41-year-old from Grimsby, a 34-year-old from Ancaster, a 36-year-old from Brantford, a 36-year-old from Hamilton, and a 51-year-old from York. Each of them faced charges of assault causing bodily harm and robbery. Additional charges were filed against 2 individuals, the Hamilton man for breaching a prohibition order and possessing an unauthorized prohibited device, and the York man for breaching firearms storage regulations. This incident is part of a larger crackdown on outlaw motorcycle gangs across southern Ontario. Recent months have seen arrests tied to similar crimes in Hamilton and Kitchener. Detective Inspector Scott Wade of the Biker Enforcement Unit emphasized the ongoing threat posed by these groups, noting their persistent involvement in violent criminal activities. He commended the work of the enforcement unit and partner agencies, highlighting the importance of public tips and frontline intelligence in dismantling these networks. The arrests are a clear signal that law enforcement is committed to disrupting the operations of outlaw motorcycle gangs and holding their members accountable. Number 1. The coveted murder plot. This story sounds like something out of a crime drama, but it's real. Naji Sharifi Zindashti, a 49-year-old based in Iran, is accused of organizing a murder-for-hire plot with help from Damian Ryan, a Canadian member of the Hells Angels, and Adam Pearson, one of Ryan's associates. According to US authorities, Zindashti wanted to target an Iranian defector and the defector's female companion in Maryland. Apparently, he acts on behalf of the Iranian government, which is eager to punish its pro-American former citizens. Zindashti allegedly offered Ryan $350,000 for the job, plus $20,000 for travel. Ryan brought Pearson into the plan, along with a team of 4 people. Pearson, who was living illegally in Minnesota at the time, is currently in prison. The group used an encrypted messaging app, SkyECC, to plan the hit. In their messages, Ryan described the plan in brutal detail, saying his operatives would erase his head from his torso. Despite all this talk, the plot was never carried out, and the intended targets remain unnamed in court documents. In January 2024, Zindashti, Ryan, and Pearson were charged with conspiracy to commit murder for hire, which could mean up to 10 years in prison if no one was hurt. Pearson is also facing firearm-related charges. Meanwhile, the US and UK announced sanctions against Zindashti and his network, which authorities say was a long time coming now. As per the police records, Zindashti's background is full of red flags. He's been arrested multiple times in Iran and Turkey on drug charges and is accused of running a criminal network that targets Iranian dissidents worldwide. Turkish authorities even believe he was involved in the 2020 kidnapping of Habib Chab, a Swedish-Iranian activist later executed in Iran. Now it seems like Zindashti runs deep with Hells Angels too. As per the authorities, the notorious motorcycle club has intricate ties with international crime syndicates. This is why law forces cannot rest before all the nefarious members of the club are behind bars.
Eddie Lato, but as part of the conditions for his early release from prison, Lancia had promised not to have any contact with the Hells Angels.
Imagine the kind of men who run red light empires, vanish into foreign safe houses, and even pull off hits in broad daylight, some with grenades, others with knives. One ordered a bombing from a prison cell 2,000 miles away, while another vanished, only to return and betray the entire brotherhood. These aren't just legends and stories, they're real. From Berlin to Bremen, Cologne to Mallorca, here are 20 of the most feared German Hells Angels in the world. And trust us, you haven't heard the worst of what they've done yet. Number 20. Frank Hainbuth. Frank Hainbuth's story doesn't begin with motorcycles or headlines. It starts in Hanover, Germany, back in 1964. Before anyone knew his name, he was just a local kid with a boxer's build and a fighter's mindset. It wasn't long before he found his true calling with the Hells Angels. By the early 2000s, Frank had risen to lead the Hanover chapter, a group so dominant that people whispered it might be the most powerful chapter in all of Germany. The media didn't hesitate to call him the unofficial head of the Hells Angels across Europe. His mix of physical presence, sharp planning, and unshakable authority gave him influence that stretched beyond biker circles. Frank was known for pulling rival groups together under one umbrella, reshaping Hanover's underworld into something more unified and far more controlled. Many believed nothing major moved through the city's gambling or adult scenes without his approval. Those who challenged that system often faded quietly from the spotlight. Some stories hinted at dark outcomes, and while whispers of orchestrated disappearances or retaliatory plans swirled, charges either didn't hold or never came at all. Then came 2 turning points. First, in 2012, elite German forces launched a full-scale operation on Frank's world. Helicopters, tactical raids, and a dramatic arrest that felt ripped from a crime drama. While serious allegations were made, including claims of plotting harm, the evidence wasn't enough. The case unraveled. But Frank wasn't done. By then, he had already taken his influence to Spain's sunny island of Mallorca. There, his group reportedly catered to the wealthy crowd, though behind closed doors, authorities claimed something much more elaborate was unfolding. In 2013, Spanish police arrested dozens, including Frank, accusing him of leading an international network involved in trafficking and financial crimes. The trial dragged on for years. Many involved chose plea deals, but Frank stood firm, and in 2023, Spain's High Court ruled there wasn't enough proof to say he led a criminal group. But while Frank Hainbuth's name echoed across Europe, another figure was quietly climbing the ranks. Number 19. Nekati Arabacu. Nekati Arabacu, better known as Niko, was born in 1972 to Turkish immigrants in Germany. He came up in Cologne's rough nightlife scene, where boundaries blurred and ambition ran deep. By the time he was in his late 20s, Neko had become a familiar name to local police, his presence tied to some of the city's most notorious clubs and red light establishments. One name kept popping up: Babylon, a brothel under his control that allegedly pulled in serious cash. The rumors weren't just about money, though. People spoke of pressure, fear, and those who stepped aside when Niko entered the room. In 2002, things caught up with him. German authorities made their move, arresting him on a long list of serious charges, including extortion and more. In 2004, he was sentenced to 9 years behind bars. But prison didn't slow him down. If anything, his influence only deepened. Investigators claimed he continued running operations from his cell, and in one chilling allegation, he was even said to have arranged for a prosecutor to be unalived, though nothing ever came to pass. By 2007, Niko was released early and deported to Turkey. From there, he wasted no time. In 2010, he co-founded the Nomads Turkey chapter of the Hells Angels, setting up a powerful base in Izmir while, according to investigators, continuing to pull strings back in Germany. When Frank Hannebuth landed behind bars in 2013, whispers began that Neko had become the new quiet force behind Europe's biker underworld. And then came the rumors: an internal raid in Krefeld, a bombing in North Rhine-Westphalia, moves in Mallorca, all allegedly tied back to his crew. Even as German authorities tried to catch up, he stayed out of reach, protected by Turkey's lack of an extradition treaty. That all changed in July 2020. Acting on an international notice, Turkish special forces raided a villa in Izmir. Neko was arrested. However, even with Neko off the streets, the world he helped shape didn't disappear. It had been forged long ago by men like this next one. Number 18. Thomas Born. Thomas Born, known across Hamburg as Karate Tommy, wasn't just another tough guy with fists. Born in 1952, he carved out his legend not with noise, but with brutal certainty. A former kickboxing champion and martial arts instructor, he brought defense to the front lines of Hamburg's red light district. In the early 1980s, Born became the muscle behind the Nutella Gang, a group of younger, flashier pimps looking to reshape the local scene. He ran what they called the Abteilung Stress, an enforcement wing that showed up when lines were crossed. Rivals who tried to move in, or bar owners who refused to play along, learned that a phone call to Tommy could end negotiations quickly. He was known to ride a Harley straight into clubs, making his point with gestures no one forgot. He once described those days with a calm that made the chaos even more unsettling. We had 120 women in 11 establishments, and nearly every month a shootout. It wasn't pride, it was just fact. That was the world he lived in. By the mid-1980s, the biker scene and the red light underworld had fused. The Hells Angels were rising, and Born, with his reputation already carved into Hamburg's nightlife, became a natural fit. He joined their ranks, using his old tactics to help the club gain territory and keep rivals in check. One major raid in 1983 brought 500 officers down on their clubhouse, but Tommy somehow dodged major prison time. Even journalists steered clear. One later admitted that Tommy had threatened him, though he called it just adrenaline. He had a strange code, one that avoided targeting civilians and reserved his force for fellow criminals. In his later years, he softened, almost mythologized. When he passed in 2015, the funeral felt like a roll call of the underworld, with everyone who once feared or followed him turning up to say goodbye. But further east, another kind of figure was quietly commanding the room without ever raising his voice. Number 17. Rudolf Triller. Rudolf Triller, better known by his nickname Django, wasn't the kind of biker who stormed into clubs or made threats in the open. His power came from silence, strategy, and the way a room shifted when he walked in. Older than most of his peers, Django had been wearing his patch for decades, earning it in Berlin long before biker wars made national headlines. And unlike others who flexed muscle on the street, he wore suit jackets over his leather cuts, stepping up to microphones with the calm of a man who knew he held cards no one else could see. He became the public face of the Hells Angels in Germany, a kind of spokesman who could hold a press conference and say almost nothing, yet still leave reporters rattled. One moment he was answering questions about biker defections during the 2010 war in Berlin. The next, he was cutting off inquiries with lines like, "We'll let you know in the next few days." Nothing confirmed, nothing denied, but everyone understood the message. While Django projected polish to the outside world, those inside the scene knew better. He wasn't just handling the media, he was managing chaos. When Bandido's members crossed over to the Hells Angels, Django enforced order. Behind closed doors, he was rumored to have orchestrated internal cleanups, ensuring no betrayal went unchecked. One Berlin charter president was nearly unalived in 2012 under suspicious circumstances, and though Django's name floated through the speculation, nothing stuck. He remained untouched, at least officially. Police saw him as more than a figurehead. After Frank Hannebuth's arrest, intelligence reports suggested Django might step in as a Europe-wide coordinator. That kind of trust didn't come from speeches, it came from fear and loyalty. A summons to talk with Django meant you'd crossed a line. Whether you came back from that talk depended on what kind of trouble you brought. However, sometimes the real danger comes from inside the clubhouse. Number 16. André Sommer. André Sommer wasn't born into the biker world. Raised in East Berlin, he was a football hooligan before anything else. Someone who knew how to stand his ground long before he ever rode a Harley. By the 2000s, that old-school grit turned him into the leader of the Hells Angels Nomads chapter in Berlin, ruling the Wedding and Reinickendorf districts with a sharp eye and a heavier hand. His crew dominated those neighborhoods. From drug trade to protection rackets, everything filtered through the Nomads. Sommer, built like a wall at nearly 300 pounds with a shaved head and unflinching presence, was the face of that empire. Independent players who crossed lines, even rival biker recruits testing limits, often got a personal reminder of who ran things. But André's real battles weren't just with outsiders. In 2010, when a wave of Bandido's bikers, many of Turkish descent, defected and joined the Hells Angels in Berlin, it shifted the balance. Tensions quickly rose between the old guard Nomads, led by Sommer, and the new arrivals, who were soon referred to as the Hells Angels Turkey faction. By 2012, the city had had enough. Police moved to shut down the Nomads altogether. Sommer stayed one step ahead, disbanding the charter before the ban could land, liquidating assets and hiding cash. It was a smart move, but not enough to keep him safe. That June, just past midnight, Sommer was closing up his Reinickendorf restaurant when someone ambushed him. Shot 6 or 7 times at close range, he collapsed. But somehow he lived. Doctors induced a coma. Police watched his hospital door 24/7. The whispers came quickly. Some blamed old Bandido's rivals. Others looked inside the Hells Angels, pointing to jealousy and betrayal. Sommer never named names, and when he recovered, he simply said, "I'm fit again." It wasn't just a statement, it was a warning. In the underworld, he remains a symbol of survival, of silence, and of power that doesn't fade even after bullets fly. But survival, as André Sommer proved, doesn't always mean staying out of sight. For some, it meant stepping into the spotlight and daring the world to blink first. Number 15. Kadir Padir. Kadir Padir was part of a newer generation, fierce, bold, and far less concerned with staying in the shadows. He came up through Berlin's underworld at a time when gang alliances were crumbling and reputations were earned fast and lost even faster. Of Turkish descent, Padir rose quickly through the ranks and by the early 2010s had taken command of the Hells Angels City Charter, a faction based in Berlin's Wedding district. His crew was largely made up of former bandidos, bikers who had patched over in 2010, bringing old loyalties and fresh rivalries with them. Padir had charisma, a street-hardened presence, and an unshakable hold on his men. But he also carried a temper that didn't cool easily. In January 2014, that temper would ignite a series of events that shocked Germany. It all began with a personal grudge. one involving a man named Tahir Ur, a local figure with his own reputation who had reportedly insulted the Hells Angels and even stabbed one of Padir's men weeks earlier. Padir wanted retribution, and he didn't want it quiet. On January 10, 2014, his crew stormed into a Berlin betting shop where Tahir happened to be. 13 men, some masked, some armed, slipped in through the back. In under a minute, bystanders were held down, and Tahir was shot multiple times in full view of the shop's security cameras. The footage captured everything. It was direct, calculated, and impossible to deny. Within days, police had arrested most of those involved. The man accused of pulling the trigger stayed silent, but one insider, nicknamed the Persian, broke under pressure, revealing that Padir had orchestrated the whole thing. He had allegedly placed a bounty on Tahir's head and mapped out every step of the attack. At trial in 2015, Padir faced the court as the man behind the plan. He was sentenced to life in prison for incitement to murder. 7 of his men received similar sentences. The public dubbed it the betting shop massacre, and for law enforcement, it became a wake-up call. The recklessness of the hit and the clear proof caught on camera pushed the government to ban Padir's chapter entirely. Yet behind bars, Padir's reputation only grew among some circles. He was seen by a few as a man who never flinched and never betrayed the code, even when the cost was everything. But as the dust settled around Padir's downfall, another story was already unfolding. Number 14. Aygun Muçuk. Aygun Muçuk was not a man who followed. He built his reputation in the Frankfurt Hells Angels, but by 2014 he was ready to lead. Feeling sidelined by the club's German-dominated leadership, Muçuk, stocky, bearded, and in his early 40s, broke away to form his own chapter in Gießen, a town not far from Frankfurt. This move wasn't just organizational, it was deeply personal. His new chapter largely consisted of bikers with Turkish backgrounds like himself, and that alone drew a sharp line in the sand. To the Frankfurt Charter, Muçuk's group was stepping into forbidden territory, and Muçuk, he wasn't one to ask permission. Almost immediately, tensions exploded into open hostility. Just months after the Gießen chapter was founded, a chaotic shootout erupted outside a Frankfurt nightclub, leaving 5 people injured. It was only the beginning. In 2016, during a public holiday in May, another shootout broke out in central Frankfurt, this time in broad daylight. Bystanders were injured, and again all signs pointed to the same internal war. Gießen against Frankfurt. Muçuk, by most accounts, didn't just order these clashes, he was there, willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with his crew in the line of fire. That defiance made him a legend to his supporters and a growing threat to his enemies. But not everyone admired his boldness. Some saw him as reckless, others as a challenge that needed to be erased. On the morning of October 7, 2016, Aygun Muçuk arrived at his Gießen clubhouse, a heavily secured compound he had turned into a symbol of his independence. But before 8:30 a.m., someone was waiting. Shots rang out, between 13 and 16 in total, and Muçuk collapsed just outside his own headquarters. A cleaning lady found his body soon after. No one was ever charged. Despite heavy police raids and speculation that it was an inside job, the outlaw code held firm, and as the last echoes of Gießen faded, another figure in the Rhineland was about to remind everyone just how quickly things could spiral. Number 13. Karl-Heinz B. Karl-Heinz B., better known in the Hells Angels world as Kali, wasn't flashy. He didn't chase headlines. But among those who rode with him in the Bonn chapter, he was the kind of man you didn't test. A veteran of the Rhineland's biker scene, Kali moved with quiet certainty, the kind that came from years of looking over his shoulder. In 2010, those years of tension caught up with him in a single, irreversible moment. It happened just before dawn on March 17th. Kali's home in the village of Anhausen was still dark when a special police task force arrived. They were there to search the property as part of ongoing biker investigations. But Kali, like many in his position, lived under the constant threat of rival attacks. The feud between the Hells Angels and Bandidos at the time wasn't just talk. Clubhouses were being targeted, homes threatened, and no one truly felt safe. So when Kali heard the sound of his door being forced open, he didn't wait. He grabbed a pistol and fired 2 rounds through it. One of those bullets struck a 42-year-old SEK officer, fatally wounding him. The aftermath was chaos as police stormed the house, disarmed Kali, and arrested him. Inside, they found weapons and evidence of extortion, enough to support a string of charges. By 2011, a regional court convicted him of manslaughter and sentenced him to 8.5 years, adding up to a total of 9 years when the other offenses were included. It seemed like the end of the road until it wasn't. Later that same year, Germany's highest court stunned the country by overturning the conviction. They ruled that Kali had genuinely believed he was under attack by armed rivals, not the police. The court concluded he had reacted in what he mistakenly thought was self-defense, meaning he couldn't be held fully responsible for the officer's death. While Kali's case proved how fear and impulse could twist the law's grip, what came next would stretch even the darkest corners of the outlaw world into something few had imagined. Number 12. Ramin Yektaparast. Ramin Yektaparast had always carried a reputation for being unpredictable. Born in Germany to Iranian parents, he started his outlaw path with the Bandidos, before switching allegiances and joining the Hells Angels. By the late 2000s and 10s, he had become a dominant presence in the Ruhr region, especially around Duisburg and Oberhausen. Those who knew him described him as wild and volatile, someone constantly trying to prove his worth. But no one expected the horror that would unfold in 2014. That year, a fellow Hells Angel known only as Kai disappeared. He had once been close to Ramin, but the two reportedly fell out, either over money or suspicions that Kai had been talking to the wrong people. What followed would shake even hardened bikers. Prosecutors allege that Ramin not only ended Kai's life, but dismembered his body with help from others, scattering the remains along the Rhine and in nearby canals. It started with a single tattooed arm washing up on a riverbank, a piece marked with a symbol only given to those who had taken a life on behalf of the club. That detail alone sent chills through investigators. Over the following weeks, more remains were found, stuffed into barrels and bags. The message was loud and clear. This wasn't a random act, it was personal, calculated, and meant to send a signal. Several suspects were arrested and put on trial, but with frightened witnesses and missing links, convictions were rare. Ramin, however, never saw a courtroom. Before police could close in, he fled Germany and resurfaced in Iran. That's where things took a surreal turn. Reports emerged in 2022 that Ramin had aligned himself with Iranian intelligence figures, allegedly offering to orchestrate attacks on Jewish institutions in Germany. Western agencies began referring to him not just as a fugitive, but as an operative. Then, in late 2023, rumors surfaced that Ramin had been unalived in Iran, shot in what looked like a targeted hit. Whether it was foreign intelligence, a gang dispute, or something deeper remains unknown. But in the end, his story became legend for all the wrong reasons. In the world of outlaw bikers, even fear has its limits. With Ramin Yektaparast, those limits were shattered. But just when it seemed the era of biker warfare might be fading into memory, the streets of Hamburg lit up with a grave reminder. Number 11. Dariush F. Dariush F., better known as Dari, wasn't just another face in the crowd. By his late 30s, he had become one of the most recognizable figures in Hamburg's underworld. A German-Iranian mobster who ruled the Hells Angels chapter tied to the Reeperbahn, the city's infamous red light district. Sharp-suited, always behind the wheel of a Bentley, Dari carried himself like a man untouchable. But that polished image masked a short temper and a trail of enemies. His chapter's long-standing rivalry with the Mongols Motorcycle Club, an outfit founded by Kurdish clan members, was turning from posturing into something far more dangerous. In 2016, tensions reached a boiling point. Hells Angels members allegedly attacked and seriously wounded the Mongols' vice president in Bremen. That act didn't go unanswered. On August 26, 2018, the retaliation came. Dariush was sitting in traffic at a red light on Millantorplatz, just minutes from the heart of his turf. It was late, the streets still alive with nightlife, when a figure approached his car. Then came 5 shots, each one aimed with precision. The bullets tore through the windshield, striking him in the head and chest. He didn't die. Rushed to the hospital, Dariush clung to life. The damage, though, was irreversible. He survived, but was paralyzed from the chest down. In the courtroom, a 27-year-old Bulgarian man confessed to pulling the trigger. Hired by the Mongols, he explained that the hit was payback, meticulously planned to hit Dariush at his most predictable hour. The man was convicted in 2020, and soon after, a deeper plot unraveled. Arash R., a former Mongols leader, had allegedly orchestrated the entire hit. He, along with 2 women who assisted in logistics, were later sentenced. Dari's chapter was eventually subdued, while the Mongols disbanded in the city shortly after. And Dari himself, confined to a wheelchair, still spoke of revenge. A judge once noted he hungers for it, a chilling reminder that old feuds don't die easily. But then came a man who didn't just wear the patch, he helped stitch it into Germany's underworld for the very first time. Number 10. Rainer Kopperschmidt. Rainer Kopperschmidt, known among his brothers as Blues, was only 21 years old when he co-founded the first ever Hells Angels charter in Germany. The year was 1973, and the streets of Hamburg were restless, ripe for a new kind of order. What began with a local group called the Bloody Devils transformed into something far bigger when Rainer and a handful of others officially flew the Hells Angels name, setting the foundation for what would become a nationwide syndicate. Under Rainer's watch, the club's identity fused with the pulse of Hamburg's Reeperbahn, a red light district already thick with its own codes. Deals were made, alliances were struck, and before long, the Hells Angels weren't just visible, they were dominant. Kopperschmidt's chapter became known for its grip over protection rackets in St. Pauli's bars and brothels, while the club's presence alone kept rivals at bay. But that rise didn't come without consequence. In April 1973, a young man lost his life after an altercation with a Bloody Devils biker, an event many saw as a turning point, a doorway into darker times. Over the next decade, tension between the Angels and authorities escalated. Then, in August 1983, it all cracked open. A massive police raid, involving 500 officers, descended on the club's headquarters, Angels Place. 24 members were arrested. Kopperschmidt, considered a central figure, was among those investigated. That same year, the West German government officially banned the Hamburg Charter, citing its deep entanglement with organized crime. But Rainer wasn't finished. After the Hamburg chapter fell, he quietly shifted his influence to Bremen. His role became less public, but no less respected. By the time he passed away in July 2020, his reputation had grown into legend. Hundreds of bikers flooded Bremen's Wahler Cemetery in a thunderous procession, honoring the man who had lit the fuse. Police stood by, but there was no chaos, just silence, chrome, and respect. Among those expected to attend was Frank Hannebuth himself, a sign of just how deep Rainer's legacy ran. From a dive bar in Hamburg to the heart of Germany's biker underworld, Rainer Blues Kopperschmidt remains a name that echoes wherever engines rumble. But where Kopperschmidt laid the foundation, someone had to enforce the rules, and in the shadows of Hamburg's red light glow, that task fell to another man. Number 9. Mario Amtmann. Mario Amtmann wasn't the kind of man you forgot after meeting. Towering, stone-faced, and never far from his Harley, he helped muscle the Hells Angels into existence during their earliest years in Germany. In the early 1970s, he rode with the Bloody Devils, a gang known for its raw aggression and its eventual transformation into the country's first official Hells Angels chapter. While others plotted strategy, Mario handled what they called the rough stuff. His reputation was carved into the pavement of St. Pauli's Reeperbahn, bar by bar, alley by alley. By 1991, he had risen to vice president of the Hamburg Charter, pictured shoulder to shoulder with underworld figures like Ringo Clem during the height of the gang's dominance. But long before the cameras and the titles, Mario was already known as the man who made sure debts were paid and respect was enforced. During the gang wars of the 1970s, he became a feared figure. Turf battles over prostitution and drugs turned St. Pauli into contested ground, and Mario's presence was often the final word in those disputes. In April 1973, when a 20-year-old church acolyte was tragically unalived by a Bloody Devils member, Hamburg reeled. Though Mario's direct involvement was never confirmed, the incident marked a turning point, an unmistakable signal that the streets were no longer just dangerous, they were ruled. Through the rest of the decade, Amtmann enforced the gang's grip over local businesses. Witnesses recalled him riding his Harley straight into establishments, demanding protection money and delivering brutal warnings to anyone who refused. His name became inseparable from the Angels' growing hold on trafficking and exploitation in the city's underground markets. To law enforcement, he spread fear and terror through districts like Schanzenviertel with a quiet certainty. His reputation wasn't built on show, it was built on what people knew would happen if they crossed him. In 1983, the hammer came down. During the massive raid that broke the Hamburg Charter, Mario was among the 24 arrested. He served time for organized crime, but even after prison, he remained a respected elder in biker circles. When he passed in June 2021 at age 65, it wasn't just the end of a life, it was the closing of a brutal, formative chapter. To those who still speak of the Bloody Devils, Mario Amtmann remains the face of Hamburg's rawest years. Where respect wasn't asked for, it was taken. However, Frankfurt was still roaring, kept alive by a figure who refused to bow out, no matter how many times the law tried to shut the door. Number 8. Walter Burkhard. Walter Burkhard, known across Germany's biker world as Schnitzel Walter, was more than a club leader. He was the 1%er's iron grip on Frankfurt's underworld. With a grizzled face, tattooed arms, and a sharp eye for loyalty, Walter didn't just lead the West End chapter of the Hells Angels, he embodied it. His rise began in the 1990s when he helped establish the charter. From the start, it was clear, this wouldn't be a crew playing by society's rules. Under Walter's watch, the West End chapter built itself into a world of its own, a parallel Gesellschaft, as prosecutors would later call it. They had their own clubhouse, their own code of silence, and even their own set of laws. Anyone stepping onto Hells Angels turf knew what that meant. By the 2000s, Walter's charter was locked in a fierce rivalry with other clubs like the Outlaws and Bandidos. During the 2010 biker wars, authorities tied his crew to drive-by shootings and even grenade attacks. And in 2011, the government finally stepped in, banning the West End and a sister charter outright. The reason? The law and Walter's club no longer shared the same understanding of what counted as legal behavior. But if officials thought that would stop him, they didn't know Walter. Even after the ban, Schnitzel Walter kept moving just below the radar. Then came February 2023. At Frankfurt Airport, right in front of security cameras and witnesses, Walter, then 69, allegedly attacked two Outlaws members alongside his son and nephew. It wasn't just a brawl. According to investigators, it was a message, a reminder that in his eyes, Frankfurt still belonged to the Angels. Charges followed. Prosecutors outlined how his family had become a biker mafia of its own. His son, 28, and his nephew, 37, were accused of joining him in the assault. But Walter didn't flinch. Rumors swirled about his nickname, Schnitzel Walter. Some said it came from a gruesome joke he once made after a fight. No one could confirm it, but the name stuck, and so did the fear. In court today, Walter sits unbothered, still loyal, still unrepentant. For many in Germany's biker world, he's a reminder that old legends don't fade quietly. They age with fists still clenched, boots still laced, and the fight still burning behind their eyes. Meanwhile, another name was echoing through Berlin's underworld, one that came to define the capital's entire biker scene. Number 7. Frank Weber. Frank Weber wasn't loud because he didn't need to be. When he walked into a room, people shifted, whether out of respect or fear depended on which side of the patch you were on. By the time he passed away in November 2024, at age 66, his reputation had already crossed borders. Hundreds of Hells Angels from across Europe, and even from America, rode into Berlin to accompany his urn to its final resting place. That thunderous farewell said everything about the life he led. Weber was one of the first to bring the Hells Angels into the heart of Berlin. In 1990, just months after the Berlin Wall fell, he and a small group of riders founded the capital's first charter. The timing couldn't have been more volatile. East and West Berlin's criminal worlds were colliding, and Weber was ready to claim a stake in the chaos. Before his patch, he was known in West Berlin's gritty rock and tattoo scene. He even co-founded the Berlin Tattoo Convention, bridging outlaw biker culture with the city's underground pulse. As president of the Hells Angels Berlin, Weber steered his chapter through decades marked by bloodshed and expansion. The 1990s and 2000s saw his crew locked in turf wars, fighting not just rival biker clubs like the Bandidos, but also local gangs. Drug trafficking, extortion, and clashes over red light territory became everyday business. In one infamous shootout outside a Berlin nightclub in 2000, multiple people were injured, an event that symbolized how high the stakes had risen. Weber was rarely directly tied to these incidents, but police believed he orchestrated the retaliation visits, known in biker slang as Hausbesuche, where enemies were met with swift and brutal reminders of who ran Berlin's streets. By 2012, the government had enough. The Hells Angels Berlin City chapter was banned. Still, Weber kept moving, operating from the shadows. By 2016, he'd become an elder statesman, reportedly playing a quiet role in diffusing internal tensions after the unaliving of Aygun Muçuk. Even as law enforcement clamped down, Weber's influence remained steady. When he died, the international turnout made one thing clear: Frank Weber wasn't just Berlin's old-school angel, he was its myth. The man who had built a legacy in silence and whose ashes now rest in the city he once ruled without ever needing to raise his voice. However, another man had already become a quiet legend, one who kept his hands clean but made sure. Number 6. Christopher R. Christopher R.'s story doesn't begin in the world of motorcycles or backroom deals. It begins in the stadiums of Europe, where football wasn't just a sport to him, it was a battlefield. In the summer of 1998, during the World Cup in France, Christopher was in his early 20s and had already made a name for himself among hardcore football hooligans. What happened that year, however, would change everything. During a clash between riot police and fans, he was involved in an incident so serious that it left a French officer, Daniel Nivel, permanently disabled. Christopher was arrested and served over 3 years in prison, a sentence that marked the end of his hooligan phase, but not his appetite for chaos. When he got out in the early 2000s, he didn't just walk away from trouble, he rebranded it. Trading team colors for the red and white patch of the Hells Angels, he resurfaced in Potsdam, just outside Berlin. By the late 2000s, Christopher had worked his way up to vice president of the Potsdam chapter, a charter with a reputation for being aggressive and territorial. Under his leadership, that edge only grew sharper. Reports emerged of street clashes, daylight brawls, and rival clubs being run out of town. In 2009, a confrontation with the Gremium Motorcycle Club turned parts of Potsdam into a public standoff, leaving multiple people hurt and drawing unwanted attention to the growing biker presence. But Christopher wasn't just focused on turf. He expanded connections beyond Germany, turning up at biker events in places like Mallorca and forming ties with influential figures like Frank Hannebuth in Hanover. His status within the club rose with every new alliance. Behind the scenes, his chapter was said to be deep in drug trafficking, specifically amphetamines, using hidden labs and coded communication. Even while serving time in what was considered open prison, Christopher was reportedly still running operations. By 2013, after another arrest, he began cooperating with police. What followed was a dramatic unraveling. In 2018, he took the stand and shared insider knowledge about the Hells Angels operations across Germany. His statements implicated big names, shaking the foundation of the group. In doing so, he crossed a line. By revealing what he knew, he became a marked man. But the man who ran Bremen was the kind who led with presence, intimidation, and an iron grip on the city's underworld. Number 5. Marcel S. Marcel S. was hard to miss. Barrel-chested with a stare that could empty a room, he looked every bit the archetypal outlaw boss. As president of the Hells Angels West Side Charter in Bremen during the early 2010s, Marcel didn't just lead, he dominated. By age 42, his reputation was carved into police files and whispered through the city's nightlife. He had priors, muscle, and a sense of ownership over Bremen's red light district that few dared challenge. Bremen had always been a volatile territory. Clashes with Kurdish clans, bandidos, and mounting police pressure had fractured the biker scene. Marcel stepped into that chaos and brought order. His kind of order. With his platinum blonde wife by his side, a former sex worker nearly half his age, Marcel ran the club like a private empire. Their most infamous venture, the Venus Phal, a brothel that prosecutors later alleged was taken over through threats and coercion. The club's cut came first, and those who resisted were shown exactly why Marcel was feared. Charges filed against him read like a manual on organized vice, fraud, coercion, and aggravated extortion. The allegations painted a grim picture: workers intimidated, clients shaken down, debts collected with fists. His crew reportedly didn't stop at threats. One man who owed money was allegedly kidnapped and beaten until he paid. There were even rumors of arson against rival gang hangouts, though none of it ever stuck in court. To Bremen's club owners and nightlife crowd, Marcel was a looming figure. He wasn't just another outlaw. He was the one who made sure every rule on his turf was obeyed. Law enforcement dreaded what he might do next. During his 2014 trial, the threat of hundreds of Hell's Angels showing up was so real, police flooded the courthouse with reinforcements. Journalists described Marcel's record as typish rocker, the textbook example of a biker boss who played by his own code. Eventually, the West Side Charter was banned in 2013. Marcel and his wife stood trial the following year, their control exposed through witness testimony. Even with his charter outlawed, Marcel's reach lingered. By 2020, he'd faded from public view, but when he appeared at Rainer Kopperschmidt's funeral, quietly observing among the crowd, it was clear. Marcel S. was still part of the story. However, the man holding court in Cologne was a very different kind of presence, loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Number 4. Erkan A. Erkan A. wasn't your average biker boss. He carried himself like a mafia don, dressed in tailored suits, gold watches flashing under club jackets, and always surrounded by loyal men who knew better than to question his word. Born and raised in Cologne, he rose to lead the city's Hells Angels chapter, and by the mid-2000s and teens, had become the face of the Rhineland underworld. His reputation didn't come from posturing. It was built on years of conflict, control, and connections. Rival biker gangs, like the Bandidos, local crime families, and even rogue elements within his own crew clashed with Erkan's dominance, but none managed to topple him. He ran the red light districts like territory, with brothels, underground casinos, and drug routes all running through his network. And when someone crossed him, the consequences weren't whispered about, they were shouted through headlines. In 2015, when Albanian gangsters reportedly robbed a Hells Angels-run brothel in Cologne, Erkan's response shocked even hardened investigators. Authorities say he personally led a retaliatory machine gun assault on the Albanians' favorite bar. One man didn't survive, and 3 others were badly injured. Soon after, Erkan vanished, fleeing to Turkey, where he leveraged deep connections to avoid capture. But disappearing didn't mean retiring. Even from a prison cell in Turkey in 2020, Erkan was accused of orchestrating a violent campaign in Cologne, one allegedly tied to a bitter personal feud involving his ex-wife. Prosecutors say he arranged drive-by shootings and even had a live grenade placed beneath a rival's car. It was defused just in time. All of it, they claim, happened with Erkan giving orders from over 2,000 kilometers away. His chapter was more than just a local crew. Erkan was reportedly a founding member of the Hells Angels Nomads Turkey, helping move narcotics across borders. His name came up again and again. Whenever witnesses vanished, whenever a body was found, whenever a message was sent in the most brutal fashion possible. Eventually, in April 2021, Turkish police caught him. But even that wasn't the end. During a courthouse appearance, Erkan's relatives created enough chaos to help him escape. He was recaptured only after a car chase and gunfire, which left him wounded. As of 2025, he remains imprisoned in Turkey. Germany wants him back, But even behind bars, Erkan Ağ's legacy keeps casting shadows. Cologne still remembers the years when one man's phone call could send a city into lockdown. But the man often sent to carry out his plans was still slipping through every crack, quiet, ruthless, and always one step ahead. Number 3. Hassan O. Hassan O, better known in the biker world as Napoleon, wasn't the kind of outlaw who needed a title or territory. He didn't run a charter, didn't host meetings, and didn't pose for photos. He was the ghost in the machine, the one you called when something needed to be handled quickly, cleanly, and without any noise until it was too late. Despite his nickname, which hinted at his smaller stature, Hassan's reach stretched across borders and rivalries, making him one of the most feared names in Europe's biker underworld. He first emerged on the radar as a loyal enforcer within the Hells Angels Cologne chapter, running close to Erkan Ağ. But while most bikers craved status within the club, Hassan moved differently. He didn't stay tethered to one crew. Instead, he offered his skills where they were needed, quietly building a reputation as the man who didn't miss. Authorities eventually tied him to at least 7 serious plots across Europe, some involving explosives, others orchestrated shootings, all with one signature. No warning, no witnesses. In 2019, Danish police began investigating a high-profile murder in Copenhagen, and all signs pointed to Hassan. Soon after, his name appeared on Interpol's Red Notice list. But instead of slowing down, he vanished into Turkey's criminal underworld. From there, he allegedly continued to operate in coordination with Erkan, even organizing a bombing attempt and a drive-by shooting in Cologne in 2020, both tied to personal feuds and long-simmering biker wars. Hassan's name also surfaced in a disturbing 2016 car bombing case in Germany, and later in a failed hit attempt in Istanbul in 2021. These attacks were never publicly claimed, but their style, brutal, targeted, and efficient, matched his known methods. Police believe he's connected to the Turkish Hells Angels Nomads chapter, acting as a free agent in exchange for shelter and security. What makes Hassan Napoleon O especially dangerous is that he has no fixed home, no business front, no obvious ties beyond the jobs he takes. Law enforcement call him a ghost, rivals call him a nightmare, and former bikers who've left the life behind still lower their voices when they say his name. In late 2022, Turkish police raided an apartment in Ankara. They found weapons and a stash of cash. But no Hassan, he had slipped away just hours before. As of 2025, he remains a fugitive. Where he'll turn up next, no one knows. Only that if Napoleon is on your trail, it might already be too late. The next chapter unfolded in broad daylight though, with no disguises, no distance, and no mistaking what had just happened. Number 2. Bjørn S. Bjørn S. wasn't a kingpin. He wasn't a chapter president or a veteran strategist. At just 27 years old, he was a foot soldier, part of the new generation of Hells Angels who didn't wait around for permission to make an impact. And in June 2009, he made one that would shake Germany's biker world to its core. The target was the president of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club in Kaiserslautern, a man locked in a brutal turf war with the Angels. The conflict had been simmering for months, with threats, close calls, and street confrontations. But what happened that June wasn't another standoff? It was a coordinated strike. According to court documents, Bjørn and 2 fellow Hells Angels tracked the Outlaws' leader for days. They learned his habits, his routes, when he was vulnerable. Then, one afternoon, they cornered him on the road, cutting off his car and forcing him to stop. What followed wasn't just an attack. It was deliberate. Bjørn stepped out with a long knife, approached the vehicle, and delivered multiple blows. The Outlaws' leader didn't make it out alive. For law enforcement, it was a nightmare scenario. A national club president, gone, ambushed in peacetime without warning. The press called it the Rockermord von Kaiserslautern, and suddenly the biker conflict wasn't just a backroom feud. It was national news. The police feared retaliation. The public feared what might come next. Bjørn disappeared. For over 2 years, he stayed off the grid while his 2 accomplices faced trial. Then, in late 2011, he turned himself in, not in Germany, but at the consulate in Mallorca. By the time he returned, prosecutors had built a case. He confessed in court, saying the plan was only to send a message. But the court didn't buy it. In 2012, he was sentenced to 12 years for manslaughter, a verdict that enraged the outlaws and sparked appeals for a harsher penalty. Still, inside the Hells Angels, Björn was celebrated. He had earned the filthy few patch and became a symbol of loyalty taken to the extreme. Behind bars, he's kept a low profile, but his name still echoes, especially in Kaiserslautern, where one violent act ended a rivalry and changed the balance of power overnight. And just when it seemed like no one would dare speak out against the Berlin Angels, one of their own did. Number 1. Kassra Zargaren. Kassra Zargaren wasn't born into the outlaw life, he chose it. In his 20s, drawn by the power, loyalty, and raw reputation of the Hells Angels, he pledged himself to the Berlin City Charter. This was known as the most dangerous crew in Germany, and Kassra, nicknamed the Persian, became an insider. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but one who moved with purpose. Over time, he earned the kind of access that most members never touch. He knew the names, the codes, the places where secrets were buried. In 2014, one moment changed everything. A Hells Angels team stormed a Berlin betting parlor. 13 men, masked and armed, moved with military precision. Their target, a rival with ties to the Mongols. As patrons scattered, Kassra held the perimeter with a weapon. Inside, his president, Kadir Padir, pulled the trigger. The man on the floor didn't stand a chance. At first, Kassra did what angels do. He kept quiet. But as the case dragged into 2016 and prison years loomed, the silence began to crack. He realized something. His so-called brothers weren't stepping up for him. He was the one left holding the weight, so he did what no German angel had done before. He talked. What followed was nothing short of historic. Kassra's testimony led to life sentences for 8 of his former crew. He didn't just name names, he laid out the whole machine. Drug networks, prostitution rings, violent orders from the top. He even tied Frank Hannebuth, the national boss, to deadly instructions. Police called it a goldmine. His former club called it betrayal. But that decision came with a price. The biker code doesn't allow for second chances. Word spread fast. Kassra was Vogelfrei. No club, no patch, no protection, only a target. Rumors circled of a contract on his head. Bounties whispered across prison cells and dive bars. Even rival gangs who hated the Angels didn't respect his choice. Because in that world, being a rat is worse than being an enemy. After entering witness protection, Kassra vanished until 2022, when he re-emerged with a book and interviews telling his side. He kept one tattoo, the Hells Angels' death head. "It's part of my story," he said. Like many other Hells Angels, he may have walked away, but the ink remained, both on his skin and in Germany's criminal history.